Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Habitus once again. My name is Michael Pattison. I'm here with my co-host, Bobby Lowe. Follow us on Twitter at habituspod, and welcome to our first ever bumper Christmas edition. On this episode, we're going to be covering a staggering 8 movies. They are in chronological order. Bob Clark's 1974 slasher film Black Christmas, followed by Bob Clark's 1983 family comedy, A Christmas Story, followed by Rennie Harlin's 1990 action sequel, Die Hard 2, which will be followed by another sequel, Chris Columbus's 1992 family comedy sequel, Home Alone 2, which will be followed by Abel Ferrara's 2001 New York crime drama, Xmas, which will be followed by Terry Zwigoff's 2003 dark comedy, Bad Santa, leading finally into Joe Swanberg's 2014 drama, Happy Christmas. That's 7 movies, of course, because firstly, surprise, surprise, we're going to be covering Rian Johnson's new Star Wars film, The Last Jedi.
Let the past die. That's the only way to become what you were meant to be.
Darkness rises, and light to meet it.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Come on! This is not going to go the way you think.
So, Star Wars The Last Jedi. Following on from events in The Force Awakens, Rey has gone to find Luke Skywalker in an attempt to coax him back from self-exile, let's say. Meanwhile, a small fleet of resistance fighters, including pilot Poe Dameron and former stormtrooper Finn, and led by General Leia Organa still, they're in flight from the First Order, which is led by Supreme Leader Snoke. As Rey develops her use of the Force and skills as a Jedi while visiting Luke, she begins to I suppose, telepathically connect with Kylo Ren, who tries to convince her to join the dark side. And sensing a kind of weakness in him, she begins to try to convince him to switch allegiances also. That's kind of the basic premise of Rian Johnson's entry into the latest Disney trilogy, the latest Star Wars trilogy produced by Disney. Bobby, you've seen the film. What were your expectations going into it? Were you looking forward to it? Did you expect it to be good?
Yeah, I'd actually let's just. I think with anything like this, you have to kind of situate yourself in relation to it generally. So, what's your relationship with Star Wars in general?
I would say that at one point I was a fan. I've gone through bursts and periods of wild enthusiasm for it without ever connecting with it on a super nerdy level.
Okay.
Right? Where to the extent to which I would know like backstories and whatever else. But it does have a kind of enduring fascination and appeal to me. I love like universes that are built from scratch and extended and expanded into a properly structured, properly deep mythology. And I liked The Force Awakens, I think, more than you did, if I recall correctly. I thought the first half...
How old were you when you first saw Star Wars?
Oof, good question. I don't know. I was aware of it before I watched it because I would play with my much older cousins as like original figurines from like the original trilogy, and so it was always part of my upbringing culturally before I even like engaged with it as a film viewer. And I think my first proper like encounter with it was when Lucas re-released them, like the original trilogy, like A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, when it was like, very much like this is episode 4. So yeah,
I'm the same. I had action figures that were secondhand from my uncle, but
right.
The first time I saw the films, as far as I'm aware, was when they were re-released in their special edition forms in 1997. So I would have been 12, and if I remember correctly, I saw A New Hope. I think they were released like 2 or 3 weeks apart across like April and May of that year.
Yeah,
and if I remember correctly, I saw A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back in the cinema, but didn't see Return of the Jedi until I got the VHS box set that Christmas. So, and I remember liking the films, but I don't ever remember having like really strong feelings about them. I like them enough to get them for Christmas, and I like them enough to watch them over the years, but I don't remember, like, my favorite film at that point in my life was probably Independence Day, which had come out the previous year.
Right.
Right. And I don't remember Star Wars ever feeling like it held a candle to that. It felt a little bit like something from another era to me. And I remember all of the hype about The Phantom Menace, being aware of it, and being interested in seeing it. But again, I don't remember having any strong reaction to it one way or the other. Like I didn't have this enormous, overwhelming sense of excitement about finally seeing the backstory to the original trilogy, because I didn't have that existing investment in the original trilogy. So I remember going to a midnight screening of Attack of the Clones after having been up at 7 o'clock in the morning to go to school and falling asleep about 20 minutes before the end. It was years until I actually saw Attack of the Clones in full.
I don't think I've seen any of the 3 prequels more than once. I may have seen The Phantom Menace more than once, but I have it on Region 1 DVD, and for many years now I haven't had a multi-region DVD player, so I don't know about that. But the other 2, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, I definitely haven't seen more than once.
I've seen them all a couple times. I remember, like, Revenge of the Sith was 2005, so that I would have gone to see that like as an adult, with a kind of a more sort of defined taste in films, and I remember thinking that it was
and a more interrogative.
Yeah, right. So I would have been like nearly 21 when that came out, and like I mean, like everybody, I thought it was better than the other 2, but like that film got a pass just on that basis. I think going back to watch it again, it's pretty terrible. So when Disney bought Star Wars and put J.J. Abrams on the case, I had very low expectations. My expectations were that these new films couldn't be worse than the prequels, but that they were unlikely to be any better than your average production line Marvel film.
Yeah.
But
it was uncharted territory, though, right? Because like it's not a set of films that are going to inevitably fill in the blanks and bring us up to date in terms of like what was happening in the first film released in 1977.
Right. It was wide open.
The prequels were always burdened with what, as we said, with regard to Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me in our very first episode, burdened with that responsibility of just providing backstory, which was always, there was always a reason why it was backstory to begin with, right? And so the excitement for me, the chief appeal of these is that it's going into uncharted territory. It's an extension of a story rather than like a retroactive expansion of it. Yeah.
So, but my thing was more like, okay, well, Disney are going to really tightly control this, and it's going to be very safe, very kind of 4-quadrant, and very, very Marvel. And then J.J. Abrams is the perfect guy to do that. So, and that is ultimately what it turned out to be. But when I saw The Force Awakens for the first time, I was blown away by the first act. I thought it was like, I couldn't believe what I was watching, how good it was. I thought that the tone was perfect. I thought it had this kind of like, I mean, that image they used in the teaser trailer. I don't think I ever watched the full trailer, but the image of the crashed Star Destroyer on Jakku, and like this sense of like this, like the passage of time and like the weight of history in this world and everything. And it was, I thought it was fantastic. And then I think once Han Solo and Chewbacca started, like, showed up, and you started kind of like seeing the way that it was kind of grinding through the story beats of A New Hope, and then when they finally introduced like a new Death Star and all that kind of stuff, I was starting to kind of tune out, and it ultimately disappointed me on that level. But and then Rogue One, I thought Rogue One felt, I don't know, Rogue One felt to me like the kind of like filmmaking by committee that it was, like they reshot like 30 30 or 40% of the film. But and again, it was another prequel. It was filling in the story gaps and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I was excited for this one because even though I was disappointed in the direction that the story went in, or less so even the direction the story went, but more the actual plot structure of the Force Awakens.
Yeah,
I really liked the new characters, so I was interested to see where they would go in this one. And I've liked 2 of 3 of Rian Johnson's previous films. I liked Brick and I liked Looper. I didn't like the Brothers Bloom. But, you know, it felt like, okay, an actual, like, proper filmmaker with, like, some sort of sense of individual personality has been given this material and these characters that I like, and he's going to take it in an interesting direction. So I would actually say that this is the first Star Wars film that I've been disappointed in.
Okay.
Because it's purely a consequence of elevated expectations, which I never had before.
I was never... it's a bit of a double-edged sword for me, the fact that they've brought somebody who might be considered an auteur in. Firstly, because I think I don't want to perpetuate that trajectory of a talented, singular vision being recruited into and appropriated by, you know, the insidious, poisonous mechanisms of the Disney empire, if that makes sense.
Well, I wouldn't feel. See, I know what you mean, and I remember feeling that way, like when Guillermo del Toro decided to do The Hobbit. I was like, oh, come on! I mean, I want another Pan's Labyrinth or Devil's Backbone or something like that. You know, an idiosyncratic film like that. And there are some filmmakers I feel that way about, because everybody wants, like, you know, everybody's over the moon at the very unlikely prospect that Quentin Tarantino is going to direct a Star Trek film.
Make a Star Trek.
That's not going to happen. Yeah. But anyway, everybody's really excited about that. Whereas I think that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. I want original Tarantino films.
I agree.
But I don't. Rian Johnson's not quite on that level for me. You know, like, I liked Looper and I liked Brick, but I'm not, like, you know, incredibly invested in his career or anything like that. So,
but regardless of personal attachment to the director, I mean, like, Brick is so idiosyncratic. And as a reworking of, like, you know, neo-noir, I think it's... I mean, I've only seen it once, like 12 years ago, but, like, I remember it being extremely thrilling to watch, not only in itself, but also because you had the sense that it was the arrival of an independent American talent. And so, like, I mean, you know, I mentioned I watched Get Out recently, and when I was watching that, I was thinking, you know, this is so confidently done that my chief worry now is Jordan Peele within 2 years will be making a Marvel movie.
Well, immediately in the wake of Get Out, there was talk about him directing Akira, the live action Akira. Like, he said he's not going to do it though. But
yeah, to his credit, yeah. But I mean, like, you know, that's the only sort of pathway now that seems to be feasible for any sort of, you know, visionary filmmaker. I mean, that's too strong a term, perhaps, but you know, hopefully my
well, it's that a lot of filmmakers do want it though. That's what they do dream of, you know. So you do have people like, you know, Gareth Edwards makes Monsters, and then he goes from that to Godzilla, and then he goes from that to Star Wars, and that's what he wants to do, you know. Whereas you have people like Guillermo del Toro who want to do Pacific Rim, and they want to do Hellboy, but they also want to do The Devil's Backbone and Crimson Peak and things like that. It depends, but yeah.
So you were disappointed, and I mean, it's a big question, but why were you disappointed? Well, let me put it this way. If you felt that the second half of The Force Awakens had begun to sort of fall into the structural beats of A New Hope, would you agree with the consensus that this is the new trilogy's version of The Empire Strikes Back?
Not really, no. I mean, on a more abstract level, maybe, than The Force Awakens being A New Hope. I mean, like, I've seen people saying that as well about this one, where, you know, they split up the crew and they're all in different places and stuff like that. That's a pretty abstract way of looking at it, I think. But
I mean, we'll get into it later, of course, when we discuss Die Hard 2 and Home Alone 2. But I mean, I feel like, for me, the Star Wars movies have become about little other than the Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
And by that, I don't mean that I want them or expect them to have real-world topical relevance at all. I mean, the more the less these films have to do with contemporary politics, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, definitely.
Although this film does definitely wear those pretensions on its sleeve, I think, to its detriment. But I mean more than that. Like Johnson tasked with steering this product into in such a profitable manner towards the final installment of this trilogy. He's kind of got to do that, but he's also, to some degree, he's also got to, or feels pressured into kind of doing so in this kind of overly reverent manner towards the universe of Star Wars. I mean, I perhaps I'm not saying this. I don't want like a radical departure from Star Wars, right? But at the same time, it's like there's these certain winks here and there for anyone with a deeper than average knowledge of this universe to pick up on and to trace, and I just I think a lot of that is paralleled by the critical response to it, because a cursory glance at the way it's been received and engaged with on social media, like the criticism around Star Wars is about very little other than the criticism about Star Wars. Yeah.
It's been really surprisingly divisive.
Yeah, when I was watching it, so I watched it on the morning after it came out. Well, I mean the first morning,
Thursday morning.
You went to see the midnight screening.
I went to the midnight screening.
I went to see it on Thursday morning, and the cinema was far from full. I think a combination of the very saturation of it. It's ubiquitous in all cinemas, and so why would every single screening, especially through the week, be full? And I was watching it, and I thought I didn't really connect with it while I was watching it. I must say, it grew more and more tedious as it went.
Yeah, I kind of agree, and I was surprised.
Minutes.
Yeah, it is. It's the longest by I think 6 or 7 minutes longer than Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, and I was sitting there feeling surprised by my own disappointment.
Me too. Yeah, I wouldn't quite say that I ever reached the point where I was bored, but I was not engaged either. I was quite at a distance from what was actually going on, and I was kind of like outside of the film, thinking, like, analyzing my own unexpected indifference.
Well, I mean, the first film, right? The first film played a big feature-length tease, basically, to the final shot of Mark Hamill returning as Luke Skywalker, and it cuts to the credits, and it's like, oh, okay, nice work if you can get it, Mark. And so this film doesn't have that setup. We've lost one key character in the last film with Han Solo. There's no other major characters to introduce or teasingly build up to.
Yeah.
And so we know that at some point in this movie, Luke Skywalker is going to be persuaded to return to help the Resistance and its cause. And although there are certain moments in this film that did kind of send positive chills.
We should say before we go any further that this is a spoiler conversation. We didn't say that at the top of this segment.
We didn't say that at the top of this episode. Actually, I wasn't aware to the depth to which I was going to go into it. But
right, I thought you were just going to jump from your discussion of Rey's intention in seeking out Luke Skywalker to what actually happens at the end. Just before you do that,
I mean. Yeah. No, I mean, at some point in the movie, we expect Luke to show up and to help the Resistance and its cause. Mm-hmm. And although there were certain moments in the movie that did send sort of positive goosebumps down my spine with, the many different leitmotifs that John Williams develops and does very well to incorporate into the plot, I found the journey towards those emotional, cathartic payoffs extremely tedious.
I wouldn't go so far as to say extremely tedious, but yeah, it was certainly. I mean, this never reached the heights of the first act of The Force Awakens, so the overriding criticism of The Force Awakens is that it is kind of a spiritual remake of A New Hope, or that it is a quasi reboot or whatever, and that is a fair criticism. I think I had the same criticism of the film, but I think ironically, that film had more of a sense of newness to it than this did.
It's strange, isn't it?
Because even though this film doesn't follow any kind of like, you can't. I don't look at this film and see the skeleton of The Empire Strikes Back or the skeleton of Return of the Jedi the way that I saw the skeleton of A New Hope underlying The Force Awakens. But at least that one introduced new characters. It introduced Rey and Finn and Poe and BB-8 and Maz Kanata and all these people.
The character here is Rose, Finn's new pal.
Right, a supporting character though. You know, like they're
yet another character to fall in love with Finn. So to add to Poe, Rey, now we've got Rose. She is a supporting character.
I quite liked her. I thought her performance was quite good.
Yeah.
But The Force Awakens, as you said earlier, it left us with a feeling of like, where are they going to go with these characters, and a sense that it was completely just like wide open and anything could happen. And you know, now that's all set up, and there's not much new in The Last Jedi. They obviously elaborated and they continued the storylines, but we're at this point familiar with their personalities and their relationships to each other. And I mean, the other problem on top of that then is that, like, even though they can add new things to this material, they can add like new weapons and new ships and new planets and new creatures. Like they had those cool like ice foxes. I thought they were pretty cool at the end. And obviously the porgs are a bit of a sticking point for some people. I thought they were quite funny actually, but there's a general kind of seen it all beforeness to it, you know, like when somebody lights up a lightsaber, or someone force chokes somebody, or like the Millennium Falcon swoops in, or like X-Wings move into attack position and open their foils, or like the Star Destroyer comes out of lightspeed or whatever. Like this is like worn out imagery. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, and it's not even just that we know it from the original trilogy. We know it from like all of the ancillary material. We know it from the toys and the games, all of the merchandise and everything else that we've seen for 40 years. Like there's no wow factor to any of it anymore.
I agree, and that was a conceptual hurdle that this trilogy was always going to have in place. One of the better responses to it that I've read is Vadim Rizov's response for Filmmaker magazine, in which he says the Abrams installment probably leaned way too hard on trotting out returning players at regularly spaced intervals, but the approach was a one-time only proposition. We're past being dazed that this is happening and reacclimatized. Now what?
Exactly, yeah.
And it's, and I tell you what, and I'll quote Vadim again in a minute, because he goes on, and I was watching this movie, right, and I'm thinking, what are the dramatic stakes here, other than the fact that the dark side of the Force and the light side of the Force are fighting for dominance over the other, as an end in itself, which okay, I can get that this is a fundamentally escapist fantasy.
It's space fantasy. It's like there's no difference between this on that level between this and like Lord of the Rings or whatever. It's just like good versus evil.
Not. Yeah. Great, okay, I can get that. But like, you need to make me care on a micro level for the people involved. Yeah. And so, like Vadim says again, 8 installments in a franchise which revolves around the perpetuation of eternal combat. We have always been at war, while ostensibly seeking its resolution has always been fueled by an obvious internal contradiction. That's best to just roll with rather than interrogate. That goes hand in hand with the well-known irony of Lucas creating Star Wars as an anti-Vietnam allegory, only to create a franchise that would come to stand in as the evil empire shutting down any space for non-franchise films. A simplistic but popular narrative, which I kind of agree with, to be honest. I think it was Peter de Bruges in the trade magazine Variety suggested that Johnson is either too weak or strong enough.
I read that too. Weak enough or strong enough to
to do whatever Disney want him to do, basically. I don't want to be too cynical with regard to Johnson's involvement. He does.
No, I think he does.
Very capable director, and I was thinking at the end of the film, has anybody been dramatically changed by the events in this film? Yeah. And I don't think they have. I think everyone kind of ends the film as they began it. And in between, Johnson knows that he has to do something with them, so he does something with them. But that's just like, I mean, like the whole
I don't know if I agree with
Finn
that.
and Rose going to.
That's a lot of people have complained about that, and I agree that is just terrible, like, storytelling. It's just like, you know, the premise there is that the Finn has a plan to get onto the lead Star Destroyer in the fleet and disable their hyperspace tracking system. Rose says, "Oh yeah, but you need to break the code to get into the room," or some shit like that. And then you have a story choice at that point where you go, "Okay, well, we need. I mean, first of all, that in itself is a story choice that you've presented this obstacle to the characters carrying out their mission." Yeah. Now, you could have Finn know how to do that. You could have Rose, who's supposed to be like a technician of some kind. You could have her know how to do it. But no, you need to give them kind of busy work to do. So, in what feels like a video game, the CGI character Maz Kanata comes up on a CGI holographic screen and tells them that they need to go to this planet and meet with this guy and get this item and bring him back just in time.
Yeah.
And like, it's pure busy work. It's not interesting in itself on any level. It's terrible. It's a terrible little side quest.
Yeah, and once they're there in that Monte Carlo milieu, I was just bored by it. Like, Justin Theroux shows up, and I'm like, okay, they've met this guy. Turns out that he's not the guy that they're going to take, because Benicio del Toro shows up. It's a good job, by the way, that you did mention the spoilers thing. Benicio del Toro shows up as this like stuttering sneak thief, and I was just like, I mean, Benicio del Toro hams it right up, and I'm like. I mean, I said when I reviewed Sicario that Benicio del Toro can steal a scene just by sleeping in it, and ironically enough, we see him in the shadows here when we first introduced to him, and then it's like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, it's Benicio del Toro. Now, I don't know. I don't know if there is a Sicario 3 in the works, but I'd kind of like to confirm it because I'm a little bit alarmed by how quickly Benicio del Toro is reduced to this kind of performance when he's out of work, because it's just like, I mean, I was watching just thinking, this is like car crash stuff, like ostensibly like, this is like, you know, a star cameo in a franchise that hasn't really had them. And I think he fluffs it up. I don't know why his character was written with a stutter. Is it meant to be a signpost for moral dubiousness? I don't know. I don't think he pulls it off in a very, like, any kind of entertaining way. I was kind of distracted by him, by his character traits. Didn't connect with it at all.
But I mean, would you say that Kylo Ren ends the film as he began it, or that Luke does?
Almost. The most compelling element of the plot for me in this film is when, as I mentioned in the premise, when Rey and Kylo Ren are telepathically connected, and not in terms of the actual scenes in which they're talking to one another, but the element of tension in Kylo Ren and Rey kind of being drawn towards their respective opposites. Okay. And I thought, ooh, does this film have the guts to go through with Rey ending up on the dark side here, and Kylo Ren turning out to be, you know, some reformed anti-hero? Ultimately, it doesn't, but I would have loved a complete double U-turn, like, you know, a heel face switch. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned on Twitter, a bit like Stone Cold Steve Austin and Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. They could have pulled it off, and I think Adam Driver is a good enough actor to pull those scenes off. I was wondering when I was watching this, does this franchise in its current state deserve Adam Driver? I can't say the same of Daisy Ridley, unfortunately. I think she's a pretty charming screen presence.
I quite liked her. I quite liked her in the first one, in the Force Awakens. I agree. I think in this one, I'm not sure if it's just the writing or it's a performance or both. Or
she has a funny way of
the fact that she's just on an island with Luke Skywalker for the whole movie or not. But.
Yeah, I mean, she has this way of over enunciating, like humorless lines, and like. She's a bit of an arsehole. Like, I think this film, like, normalizes kind of arsehole behaviour. Like, on the island, she just causes absolute havoc.
with the natives, the little nuns.
Just absolutely no apology comes
like,
forth.
Fucking their lives up, yeah.
Wow.
Little humble creatures.
But to answer your specific question, Kylo Ren, I suppose, is altered and a little bit different at the end of the film. Although I don't think they go as far with that as they could have. And I mean, Luke does.
Well, I agree. I agree that it's not an enormous transformation for him. That it's more like a sort of he's kind of becoming himself. You know, it's like a self actualization kind of thing where he's. But it's setting it up for the third one where there's no Sith Lord anymore. It's just Kylo Ren. So the master apprentice relationship has been destroyed. He killed Snoke, which I didn't see coming at all. I was quite pleased that they killed Snoke because I didn't like him.
I didn't.
I think Kylo Ren is a much more interesting villain, and he'd be more interesting on his own.
Do you think that's the best scene in the film?
The best.
The best scene in the film, the build up to Kylo Ren killing Snoke?
No, because that's this. Okay, so just sorry to come back to what I was saying before about the feeling of everything kind of feeling a little bit worn out and threadbare. Like okay, so it doesn't follow the beats of the original trilogy like The Force Awakens, but there is this overriding sense of sameness to a lot of the sequences and the scenes, and that scene in particular, it just feels like the throne room scene from the end of Return of the Jedi, with the Emperor watching Vader fighting Luke, and it's like, okay, I mean, like, yeah, it's different, but it's the same, and like the law of diminishing returns is called a law for a reason. You know what I mean? It's like a joke is not as funny the 10th time you hear it as it was the first time, and things wear out over time. And I feel the same way about the MCU or something like that with Iron Man, where it's like, oh, Iron Man, he was really cool in 2008, but and it's enough already with Iron Man, And then the problem you could say, okay, well, what about like James Bond, or what about Batman or something like that? I mean, to a certain extent, it applies, but there's a really crucial difference when you're talking about Star Wars or the Marvel movies, and that is this notion of canon and this inviolable continuity where it has to be maintained and respected across decades, and they're never going to violate it. They're never going to just go, okay, well, let's bring in a new filmmaker who has a completely different vision for this character, who can redesign all of this and can do it in a completely different way. It's never going to happen.
Yeah, I get it.
So you have like a tiny bit of wiggle room when it comes to design. Like you can alter designs slightly, but I mean, you see that even in the prequel trilogy where, Darth Vader's, biomechanical suit has those silly little, silly little control panel on the front and stuff. It's like, that's not a design choice that ever would have been made in like 2005, if it hadn't already previously been made in 1977. And the same with all the, all the imperial like lieutenants and stuff, and they all have these silly little things on their chests. It's like in Rogue One in 2016. It's like, these are not like contemporary design choices. This is like inherited from, it's very restrictive for any filmmaker coming into this kind of very like jealously guarded kind of canon,
which is an appeal to me as a viewer, and obviously is an appeal to many other viewers as well, to a larger extent. But I do like that. I do like those restrictions.
Oh, you do like them? Okay.
In terms, well, I do like them. That's what I meant when I said earlier at the start of the segment, like the building of an hermetic universe that has its own rules and also needs to go by those rules in terms of continuity. I think I would hate like Star Wars to reboot itself or whatever. I don't see how it could happen. It seems to be inviolable.
Okay.
And yet,
I'd be more on the other side of it. I think like
really,
because of the experience that I had watching this film and my just like the general fatigue that I have with Star Wars iconography in popular culture, and I mean the conversation around this film has made me never want to watch a Star Wars film again. The sorts of things that people are getting so upset about, and it seems like even something like the Force. There's a lot of people talking about like the way that the Force is depicted in this, like the Force comes too easily to Rey. Leia saving herself from being blown out of the spaceship in the middle of the film using the Force.
Mary Poppins.
Yeah. Or when that happened, I thought, oh, that was my reaction. I was like, oh, she died. She died in the film anyway.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Nobody knew. She could have died in the film. Nobody had revealed the plot. So I was like, oh, okay.
Absolutely.
Problem
and I'm
solved.
like, yeah.
But
I thought exactly the same.
But like, you know, and then Snoke being able, and actually this is one thing that bothered me a little bit, is that in that throne room scene, it's established that it was Snoke that was manipulating both Kylo and Rey's minds and making them, like, forging this psychic connection between them, and also manipulating Rey into seeing something in Kylo's heart that wasn't really there, some sort of ambivalence or you know, residual goodness that isn't there. And he's doing this from across the galaxy. Okay, so like Snoke is in that moment established as a tremendously powerful Force user. Okay, and then 2 minutes later, he fails to perceive Kylo Ren, you know, his intentions of murdering him, like moving the lightsaber right beside him to cut him in half.
Yeah.
And you know, okay, so the Force is mystical. Okay, so it's not really subject to like, but like you can't get away with that. You can't give characters magical powers and then have those magical powers just be a Deus Ex Machina where they can do whatever they want whenever the story calls for it. Like, you can't do that in storytelling. So it's not like, oh, but it's the Force. No, but the Force, for story purposes, has to have some kind of parameters in which it operates. It has to have some kind of limits. It has to have some kind of, like, you know, some kind of, like, limit. You know what I mean? And like,
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Not only just limit in terms of like a quantitative sense of like how big an object somebody can lift or something like that, but like also like this is the way that people relate to the Force, and this is how it works. And I don't mind changing that, but you have to change it in a way that like is expository and then use it. You can't just like use it, otherwise it is Deus Ex Machina. And like, I don't know. I find that a little bit you know, hard to swallow.
What did you make of Finn's abortive attempt to become a suicide bomber at the very end of the film, when he gets his like would-be send-off? You know,
I was hoping that he would do it. I thought it was quite daring.
I remember when you watched The Dark Knight Rises, and we were discussing that after you'd seen it, and you thought Batman had actually died, right? Until like the very code, like when the coda deflates everything, and like that sense of heroism.
No, I left the film thinking that Batman was dead. Right, because so he flies out over the ocean and the bomb goes off, and then there are two scenes that are very short, and I obviously was like so taken aback by, oh my god, they've killed Batman, that like whatever actually goes on in those scenes, maybe I was tired as well, but like whatever, I didn't process the content of those scenes. And it's like something that like the guys are examining the wreckage of the plane that he flew, and they're talking to Morgan Freeman. He says, oh, somebody, you know, the ejector seat was whatever, you know, it was triggered right before the explosion or something like that. That didn't go into my brain, so I was when you have the coda where he's in the cafe in Venice or Paris or wherever, I thought that was like a sad kind of like vision of what could have been. I walked out thinking, oh wow, it's really brazen of them to kill Batman in the final film of the trilogy. I really like that. And then I was talking to people afterwards. I was like, no, what? Batman didn't die. Yeah.
But I recalled that bit because I thought, oh, they're going to kill Finn off here, and I actually kind of wanted them to, you know, go through with your ideas. But of course, it has a plot significance because Rose, you know, assists him in not doing that. She sabotages his plans, and so, you know, she risks her life, and then they're going to presumably be, you know, drawn closer together because of that. I think Mark Hamill, though, is great in this film. I mentioned Adam Driver. I'm not sure if the franchise deserves a talent like him in its current state, but I thought Mark Hamill did a great job here because there's so much weight on that return and that performance, and like he's, you know, there's so many years have gone by. Like Luke Skywalker, I've had like three films, like, well, 4 films, let's say, in between Return of the Jedi and seeing Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker. You know, and like 5 if
you include Rogue One.
Yeah.
Oh no, sorry, you were talking about Force Awakens. Oh yeah, well, okay.
Whatever. But I thought he was funny. He's very arrogant in the film, which I liked.
Did you not think that it was a little bit out of character though? Considering that Luke has never been funny, and
he's always been the earnest farm boy, right?
Well, I mean, one of the things about the original trilogy that I think is was always there, but that was only made very clear by the prequels is that the Jedi are actually really boring. So, like, Obi-Wan in the original trilogy is the exception to the rule. But, like, once Luke becomes, like, a full Jedi, as he's introduced at the beginning of Return of the Jedi, he's suddenly a really boring character. And they're, like, boring in that way that, you know, characters who are completely unfazed by anything are boring. Like, they're emotionless, they're stoic, they're, like, they can control people's minds, they can manipulate objects.
There is a kind of arrogance to him in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, because he knows that, like, you know, he's just going to walk in there, rescue Han Solo, walk out.
No, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. There's no real sort of like real challenge to what they do, and but in this one, he was never like sarcastic or I don't know.
Like I love it when he says, I love it when he winks at C-3PO when he returns at the end, when he's walking out and he's going to stand in front of the AT-AT walkers. And I love it when he says finally to Ben, to Kylo Ren, see you around, kid. When he's established that he's not actually there. I don't know why. Okay, I don't know why. It just seemed very unnecessary for them to kill him off for me, though.
But he'll be back in Episode 9 as a ghost.
Yeah, but like I always had problems with even Obi-Wan Kenobi, letting Vader kill him. Strike me down, I'll come back even stronger as a ghost.
We still haven't figured out or actually did we? Is the way that he disappears at the end of this film supposed to explain the way that Obi-Wan disappears after he fights with Vader in A New Hope?
Well, it's more like Yoda as well at the end of Empire Strikes Back, right? When Yoda dies, he just disappears.
Yeah. Like that's true. Yeah. Anyway,
it's sort of like it's almost like the final confirmation of your Jedi mastery. Like you just disappear into thin air, and you can come back as a.
Well, he'll definitely be back because they don't have any of the original three now. Because obviously, it's going to be really interesting. They've really written themselves into a corner with the Carrie Fisher thing. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do that.
Because as you said, they could have killed her off.
They could have, yeah.
Somehow.
But I mean, it's hard to know like what's going to be regarded as respectful or disrespectful. Because you could say, it would be disrespectful to recast Carrie Fisher, but wouldn't it be more? Would it be more disrespectful to not complete the story of the character that she has spent her whole life playing, just because, like, wouldn't Carrie Fisher want the character story to be finished? Wouldn't those be her wishes?
Would they do that weird facial CGI?
But they can't do that for a whole film. It's too expensive. It's too
Maybe she gets killed in the first scene.
But killing her off, like
opening,
in a
the opening scroll, the text crawl,
just as though she happened to die. See, that would be the worst thing they could possibly do.
By the way, like Princess Leia is dead. Like
PPS.
That,
no, I was disappointed that they didn't kill Finn. Actually, that's a good point, because I think his character has been wasted in both films. I think that his I actually loved the idea of the defecting stormtrooper. I thought that was a really cool, interesting, untapped kind of like story potential for Star Wars. But it was never like borne out in the characterization. You know what I mean? Like he was, he's effectively like psychologically, it's like somebody who's like lived in a cult their whole lives and has left, and like everything, all of their prior relationships, all their prior emotional bonds have been taken away. And like, I'm not suggesting that Star Wars should be like really psychological and dark and everything like that, but there's a happy medium between that and just like it having absolutely no psychological consequences on him at all.
They have him demonstrating here his like built-in amorality. When he's going to just like leave the ship. He's going to do that because he wants to go visit Rey, right? But like at the same time, it's like there is a certain self-preservation, is like self-interest, pursuit of self-interest there. Sorry.
Yeah, but that's not even something that psychologically lines up with having been a stormtrooper. No. Like the stormtrooper would be like the first order above all else, kind of. That would be the brainwashing. But instead, you have this character who has like trivial connections to the Empire, where it's like, oh, well, I know where that room is on the Star Destroyer, or like, I know the technology, that's miniaturized Death Star technology. It's like, you could have any character deliver that kind of exposition. So Finn, having been a stormtrooper, is kind of inconsequential, which is disappointing. So I was kind of hoping they would just get rid of him if they're not going to use him effectively.
And what do you make of, so we've discussed Rey, discussed Finn, what do you make of Poe?
Actually, Poe, my favourite scene in the film is the scene where Poe's recklessness results in the destruction of the whole bomber fleet, where Rose's sister.
Which is the first scene, right?
It's the opening fight scene, yeah. So
yeah.
that was kind of the high point of the movie for me. I loved the we again a new little bit of a design detail. We'd never, as far as I'm aware, we'd never seen those bomber ships before, or the dreadnought actually. We're told that the dreadnought always wipes them out. It was like, well, since when? You know, but anyway, it's like, because the Star Destroyer was always the thing that was the most intimidating ship in the Empire fleet.
The bombers were like that thing that comes across the sky in Sonic 2 on the first and second level.
They were very, very
when you've got to outrun them.
I like that. I thought that was pretty cool. Again, I don't think the actual like moral and psychological consequences of his actions were borne out in the rest of the film. It was kind of brushed aside to a certain extent. I like the mutiny scene as well. I thought that was quite good. I think I'm more drawn to I think I'm more drawn to like the Resistance and Rebel Alliance stuff in Star Wars than I am like the mystical space wizard stuff. And I really hope that there are no Jedi in like the Han Solo movie. I'm sure Rian Johnson's new trilogy that he's doing is going to be very Jedi heavy, given the way that this one ends with the kid. I did like that final scene actually. Did you not like it?
Just Oliver Twist orphans like.
I thought it was quite funny where he uses the Force on the broom and has the Resistance insignia on his ring, because it separates the. I thought it was funny, but I also thought it was effective because it separates. Because another thing that a lot of people are upset about is that it turned out that Rey's parents were nobodies. I actually like that twist as well, because is that a twist though? Well, it's a twist in the sense that like. No, it isn't. Just looking at what's in the films, it isn't a twist. But in terms of what people were expecting, based on the emphasis in all of the prior films on the Skywalkers and that bloodline, they were expecting some kind of twist, like she was Obi-Wan's daughter or something like that. Right. Then it turns out she was just dumped there by her, parents who didn't give a shit about her, and that's it, and that's better. That's way better. But. It underlined that, and it emphasized that this is like bigger than the Skywalkers, and this is like, there are Force users all over the galaxy, and the Resistance is never fully dead.
It's tricky because if the film in some ways has to continue what's come, but also pave a path for going its own way. So it was kind of like it should be the most consequential movie of the whole franchise when you think about it.
Yeah.
It feels like the least in a way. It's weird.
I mean, I don't agree that like nothing changed or that they didn't take any risks or anything like that. I mean, it was unexpected that they would kill Snoke in the second film. I didn't see that coming at all. I didn't expect Luke to die the way that he died. I expected there to be I expected Luke to die, but I didn't expect him to die. Yeah, exactly. Right? I didn't expect that at all. And although when he shows up on that planet, I was like, how did he get there? And then I was like, oh yeah, he had that crashed X-wing in the water beside the island.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, but that's where my mind was. I was like, I was off somewhere else trying to figure out like how they connected A to B when you're not really supposed to even be thinking about that. Yeah.
No, I agree. I love that I revealed that he's not there. It sent chills down my spine. And I think Hamill pulls it off when he, as I said, when he says "see you around."
I'm interested in watching it again. I'm going to watch it again the first opportunity I get to watch it at home. I will, but I think, I mean, at the very least, what Rian Johnson has done here is he has made it impossible for J.J. Abrams, who's coming back for Episode 9, to remake Return of the Jedi. So I'm still looking forward to Episode 9. So
yeah. No, me too. It's the first film that I watched, because I watched Rogue One as well and I liked it, but it's the first film I've watched where I've been aware of my own tedium when I was watching it.
See, I was pretty bored. I was pretty bored through the first half of Rogue One. I thought it was really, really clunkily expository, hopping from planet to planet, and also the tone of the film was so dour. This film was less boring, I think, than Rogue One, and a better film.
What did you give Rogue One out of 10?
I gave it a 6 when I saw it first, but I would bring it down to a 5. I've given all 3 of these films 6 out of 10 at the time, but now my ratings will be more like 7 for Force Awakens, 6 for The Last Jedi, and 5 for Rogue One.
5 for Rogue One. Okay, I'm going to go 6 for Force Awakens, 6 for Rogue One. I gave this 5 when I came out the cinema. And for some reason, in the 4 or 5 days since watching it, I've not warmed to it, but I just feel less passionate about my negativity.
Okay. So it's a 6.
So probably a 6.
Actually, one more thing that I wanted to talk about was the humor in the film, which is another thing that a lot of people have a problem with. I agree with that criticism, but I don't agree that there are too many jokes. I just don't like the style of the jokes, because there were always jokes in Star Wars. In the original trilogy, they were kind of corny jokes. In the prequel trilogy, they were just like flat out unfunny jokes, you know, like goofy creatures and, you know, obviously the Jar Jar Binks thing and everything like that. And most of the characters in those films were just incredibly boring because they were all like Jedi, right?
Yeah.
The jokes in this are too like self-deprecating and sarcastic, you know, like the scene which I think is a callback to the scene at the beginning of The Force Awakens where Poe is apprehended by Kylo Ren, and they have this thing, and Poe says, how does this work? Do I talk first or do you talk first? Which is like meta commentary on like earlier Star Wars films, which you don't want. And then in this one where he calls the Star Destroyer and pretending that he's on hold. You know that scene?
Yeah,
like that was terrible.
Yeah.
And then Donald Gleason's character starts playing along with it, and it was like something out of Spaceballs or like the Family Guy Star Wars parodies or something.
I believe he's Tool Juice or something like that.
It was terrible. Yeah, I mean that was the worst joke in the film, and there were a couple other pretty bad ones, but it was I don't like that at all. It's too knowing. It's too superior. You know what I mean? It's like the filmmakers and a large portion of the audience are supposed to think that they're above the material.
And it also, conversely or counterintuitively, it dates the material.
Yeah, it does.
In a way that the 70s and 80s films weren't dated or dateable. You know, they've endured because they're not trying to be, you know, meta commentaries or anything, or trying to encapsulate some sort of zeitgeist or what's in vogue. You know, they led it in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Although I did like one joke towards the end of the film when Rey is lifting the rocks from the cave that allows everyone to escape, and she refers back to the dialogue with Luke Skywalker previously, and she goes, floating rocks or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there were some jokes in the film that were funny. But even sometimes when they were funny, I was kind of thinking like that just doesn't belong here. Like the one where Luke asks Rey where she's from, and she says nowhere, and he says nobody's from nowhere, and she says Jakku, and he says, oh well, that is pretty much nowhere.
I know what you mean.
It's a witty back and forth, but it's not. It just felt jarring to me, and you know, and I mean that makes me sound like somebody who's like, no, Star Wars should be Star Wars, but. I just don't like. I would prefer. I would prefer. That's not canonical humor. I would prefer that it was cheesy and just like I don't know.
I agree. Yeah.
Either taking it like deadly seriously the way that you know, like Gareth Edwards and Tony Gilroy did with Rogue One, or like treating it like something like a guilty pleasure, the way that this Force Awakens and this do, where it's like we have jokes, but they're jokes at the expense of people who love this. They're self-deprecating jokes, like, oh, aren't we all such nerds? I was happy to see Puppet Yoda. I was happy to see Puppet Yoda back. Because I hated CGI Yoda.
What did you feel about like his? Because he's always been a bit of an irritating wise ass anyway, right? He gets away with those kinds of lines. Well, but they're not self-deprecating. It's true. But he's always been a bit like of an upstart, really, isn't he? Like cheeky and annoying. And, you know,
a little goes a long way with Yoda. He was far too much of him in the prequels. It's like you want a scene with Yoda and then move on. That's actually my only like criticism, really substantial criticism of Empire Strikes Back, is that there's a lot of Yoda in that film. I know it's the film we meet him in and everything like that, but you know.
Yeah. No, I like it when Luke's about to burn his books, and then Yoda just burns them anyway, and like Luke's you can't do that, and Yoda's like, well,
that's the canon.
How many of those
he burned the canon,
read? Like, you know, which you know, but it felt like it was the rare moment in the film where it doubles. If you were to read it like that, it invites a meta commentary. It invites a reading that is about Star Wars, but it also works within its own within the within its own logic that's continuous with Star Wars, right? And I agree there wasn't enough of that kind of thing.
Did you notice that Rey saved books?
No.
I didn't notice it either. Apparently at the end in the Millennium Falcon or something, you can see the books that were inside the tree that Rey took them so that they weren't destroyed. Right. So she has all of the Jedi texts.
Oh, good.
So, don't worry about that. So there'll be lots of Jedi in Rian Johnson's trilogy. Yeah. Okay. That's about it for me on Star Wars.
Yeah. Wow, we've spoken a lot more and for a lot longer than I thought we would on Star Wars, the Last Jedi.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the Christmas films? Our Christmas. For the Christmas bunch. Okay, next up we have Bob Clark's Black Christmas.
Hello? Hello? Who is this?
Stop. Oh, God.
What do you want? Why are you doing this?
Let me, Billy! I know you're there, nasty Billy! Your answer is Billy!
Who are you? For God's sake, what are you doing?
I know what you did, Billy! Filthy Billy! 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 Billy!
Stop this! Oh, Jesus Christ.
Okay, so the second film we're going to talk about on this episode is Bob Clark's 1974 Canadian teen slasher film, Black Christmas. Had you seen this one before?
Yes, several times.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Like it a lot. Although when you suggested it for this episode, similar to 10 Rillington Place last time, I was a bit like, I admire that film. I'm not really in any rush to rewatch it. I think there's something about the built-in repetition of slasher templates or narratives that make me a little reluctant to watch them and rewatch them and rush back to them. But it does, I think, this one reward repeat viewings. You're a fan, I'm assuming?
Yeah, I love this. I much prefer it to Halloween.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting because actually I watched Halloween, I think, at too young an age to really appreciate it as a genre film, as a slasher film, in many other ways as well. So right. I never really got on board with it, and still haven't been able to. Well, I still haven't found reason or time to return to Halloween. But so I watched this a few years back. My dad had always recommended it to me as like for what struck him, and he's by no means like an active or dedicated cinephile, but it had always struck him as like an underrated Christmas movie. And an underrated, I suppose, slasher movie by extension. And I still feel like it is, to be honest.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it kind of established the template for the teen slasher genre. It's just that it wasn't really a hit. It kind of got swallowed up. It came out around the same time as a lot of other big films that kind of overshadowed it. Bob Clark actually claims that he gave, Bob Clark claimed that he gave John Carpenter the idea for Halloween.
In what, by proxy, or like literally like telling him or suggesting to him that he should make it?
Let me just read a quote from, Bob Clark is quoted in Richard Knowles' book Blood Money.
It's usually me who's doing the quotations. This is refreshing.
So this is again, I apologize for the long quotation, but this explains kind of the context and the relationship between Black Christmas and Halloween and the later teen slasher films. Again, this is Richard Knowles' book Blood Money, A History of the First Teen Slasher Film Cycle. Although unsuccessful commercially, the release of Black Christmas represented a moment at which a new textual model was added to the plethora of options that, in theory at least, were available to filmmakers. The story of young people being menaced by a shadowy blade-wielding killer. Yet despite having secured a pickup deal from an MPAA member and despite having generated a profit for its makers, impressive feats for a low-budget Canadian film, Black Christmas provided few incentives for cash-in production, and the new textual model that it offered industry insiders went, in practice, largely unnoticed. Due to overwhelming competition from calculated blockbusters in late 1974 and its inability to sustain ticket sales during a 1975 re-release, Black Christmas did not reach large numbers of American theatregoers, and as a result it had failed to fulfill its American distributors' expectations. As Martin Rubin, the first scholar to acknowledge in writing Black Christmas's status as the first bona fide teen slasher film, noted, Black Christmas's commercial success and critical recognition were limited, and it did not register enough impact to ignite the teen slasher cycle. Thus, where the emergence of the film type that came to be known as the teen slasher film is often linked to canonized yet tangentially similar American horror films, which are celebrated as highly innovative and idiosyncratic, the teen slasher's distinct story of young people being picked off one by a shadowy killer actually emerged in Canada, when a group of entrepreneurial filmmakers tried and failed to deliver the country's first blockbuster hit by combining, in what was a truly unique way, elements of several contemporaneous Hollywood hits. The teen slasher film emerged not with the release of auteur director Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 adult-centered blockbuster hit Psycho, or when much-vaunted horror filmmaker Tobe Hooper fashioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a minor drive-in hit rich in avant-garde aesthetics about 20-somethings being menaced by a family of deranged abattoir workers, but rather when a group of little-known Canadian-based entrepreneurs attempted to break into Hollywood with the story of an unidentified psychotic stalking and killing the inhabitants of a college sorority house one Christmas. The case of the teen slasher film's emergence provides a timely reminder that if scholars are better to understand the industrial implementation of film types, more fruitful avenues of investigation may involve focusing not just on canonical films and those that reached a large audience, rather than solely selecting films based on their capacity to electrify box office cash registers and or the extent to which they attracted popular media attention. It is also necessary to consider the impact of films which, despite the best efforts of those involved, did not generate strong ticket sales, did not become hot topics for journalists, and were not seen by many viewers. Although the first teen slasher film, Black Christmas, was not viewed by a significant number of theatregoers in 1974 or 1975, the film's co-writer, producer, director Bob Clark has gone on record on a number of occasions to describe discussions he held with a young filmmaker while in negotiations with Warner Brothers in 1977 to helm a film that the young man had scripted called The Prey, described as Deliverance meets the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with women. Their alleged conversation regarded an idea for a sequel to Black Christmas. I said what I thought I'd do is I would make it the following fall, recalled Clark. The killer had been caught and he had been institutionalized, and I would have him escape one night. The name of that inquisitive young filmmaker was John Carpenter. Clark concluded by saying I was going to call it Halloween.
Okay, so has Carpenter kind of corroborated those instances in which? Okay,
no, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know how true that is, but
right. No, it's super interesting though. Like particularly in reference to in relation to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which actually I meant to mention when I mentioned 10 Wellington Place and our discussion of this film, because. And maybe it's the fact that it clocks in at less than 90 minutes, if I recall correctly. But Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I never really feel like that would be a slog to rewatch.
Right.
Okay. I'm always up for watching that again. This film, for whatever reason, like many of its kind, it doesn't really appeal to me before I begin to rewatch it. Mm-hmm. Just to quickly, should we recount for listeners the synopsis very, very briefly?
Right. It was kind of contained in that quote there, but it's just a story about a blade-wielding maniac who escapes from a mental institution on Christmas Eve, breaks into a mostly empty college sorority house. Most of the inhabitants having already left for the holidays. He takes up residence in the attic and proceeds to kill the remaining girls one by one.
Yeah, among whom is Jess, played by Olivia Hussey, and Bob, played by Margot Kidder. And one of the things that I find really sort of compelling when I watch this, and refreshing even, is like the attention it pays to otherwise superfluous character details. So it busies itself up to a degree that it doesn't need to in terms of furthering the slasher elements of the story, if you know what I mean. So, for instance, Jess and her boyfriend, Peter, played by Keir Dullea, are expecting a baby, which doesn't really have any effect on the story in terms of what's happening with regard to the killer, but it helps us. Well, it doesn't help us really. It just gives us an idea that these aren't just teenagers, they're on the cusp of adulthood. They're in an institution that's treating them as such, as underscored by the presence of Mrs. McHenry, the house mother of the sorority house, played by Marion Waldman. And also, like, you know, like, as underscored also by, like, Bob's presence as, like, this flirtatious adult woman, who isn't just this vulnerable victim. And I just find that, do you know what I mean when I say it's like a bit like superfluous?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
with
I mean,
regard to, like, the slasher.
There are a lot of scenes. There are a lot of scenes that seem kind of that are strange that you wouldn't expect. Like this, I agree. Her whole relationship with her boyfriend. It does come into it later on, in the penultimate scene when he. Because she doesn't want a baby, so she's going to have an abortion, and he is like, disgusted and incensed by this, and they have a big fight, and he starts lurking around outside the house, and at the end of the film, when Jess is the sole remaining survivor, when she becomes the final girl, she has an encounter with the killer, and she ends up locked in the basement, and her boyfriend comes along and starts peering in the window of the basement and asking, like calling for her and stuff, and then he breaks in. He breaks into the basement, and
because she's not answering him, to be fair,
right.
So he's not to know that she's standing there wide awake and fully conscious, you know.
Right, but like,
so I think he breaks in out of concern.
Yeah,
but at that, I mean, I'm saying this in retrospect as a viewer, but at that point, we're led to believe that he could potentially be the killer.
Yeah, I actually think that's actually the one moment of the film that I don't like. I think him breaking into the basement, it strains credibility a little bit, just for the sake of presenting us with a red herring that isn't really, convincing at all.
I mean, within the film itself, the investigating officer, the local chief of police, Lieutenant Kenneth Fuller, I think he's called, played by John Saxon, he's also under the assumption that Peter might be the killer, right? Because he's overheard them Jess and Peter having an argument with regard to the baby, and he thinks that Peter's turns of phrase, his choice of phrase with regard to, like, why would you kill the baby is odd, which I don't feel particularly odd, but so Peter breaks into the basement.
Yeah. And she kills him, and the police conclude that he was the killer all along.
Yeah.
And the final scene is great. It all plays out in a long take. From the hallway looking into Jess's bedroom, and the doctor is there and the police are there, and they one by one they leave, and the camera never leaves her in her bed, and you can just hear the sounds of people departing downstairs and making arrangements to have people taken to the hospital and so on, and she's left there. There's a cop left outside, but there's no one else in the house, and then the camera just slowly pans past the vacant bedrooms of the murdered girls, and then tilts up to the attic trapdoor, and the killer is still in the attic, and then the attic trapdoor starts to open. It's a great final scene.
Yeah, it is.
I think the film is fantastic. I love it. I think it's a creepier and nastier film than Halloween. And what is one? There are a number of obviously this is if we take this as being the first teen slasher film, then to say that it does things that slasher films don't normally do seems a little bit anachronistic, but. All of the mumbling and singing and whispering that the killer does is very unusual. And like he's muttering and you're just catching little snippets of what he's saying. It's just like his own kind of internal monologue sort of partially coming out.
Because for the first part of the film at least, we only ever really hear him through his telephone correspondences with the girls, and he's calling from within the house somehow.
Yeah.
And this is decades before mobile phones were invented. There we are. Like sometimes it suggests that just due to the sound textures that it's a recording that he's playing. Other times it seems to be like he's got like multiple personality disorder, something like out of like Session 9.
Right.
And so it's never really revealed in terms of what or who he is until the very end. You know, it keeps it wide open as to who the killer is.
Right.
It's never revealed.
Yeah, there are characters like Billy and Agnes are mentioned in the killer's phone calls, like where's Billy and all that kind of stuff. Which I recently watched the 2006 remake, which takes that as Billy and Agnes are the killers and so on.
Right.
But it's really terrible.
How is the? Oh, it's terrible.
It's terrible. I think it's the worst of the millennial remakes that I've seen. I haven't seen them all, but it's toward the bottom of the list anyway.
And I'm right to remember that you normally take a more charitable reading and approach to those.
Yeah, I think the remake of The Hills Have Eyes is great. I think the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is good. Right. The remake of Piranha is good. I don't have anything against remakes. I think I'm in favor of them. Anyway. Yeah. But yeah, as the film goes on, the killer, this is in the original, the killer, he becomes more and more manic. Like we get like a scene where he's like screaming and like knocking things down in the attic and stuff. He's not like a stoic, shadowy kind of stalker the way that Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees are. And I do think other slasher films kind of fail to get how scary mania can be. Like there's a certain, like, it reminded me actually when I was thinking about this of, did you ever see Nothing to Lose?
No.
With Tim Robbins and Martin Lawrence?
No.
Where they rob like a convenience store at some point, and they're debating how best to go about it, and Martin Lawrence says you need to like get up into their face and start shouting and like give them the impression that like anything could happen. And Tim Robbins is like, no, it's much scarier to just be really calm and really cool and just let them know that this is what's going to happen if they don't cooperate. And they try both approaches, and then they ask the guy which one was scarier, and he says Martin Lawrence was way scarier.
Oh, really?
But
okay,
yeah.
No, I get what you mean. I mean, it's like the first guy who the teens encounter in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the one who's like cutting his
the hitchhiker,
palm in the van and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I totally get that.
Yeah.
But the deaths also seem to become increasingly sort of unwieldy or unplanned, let's say. I mean, with the exception perhaps of Bob, who's killed as she's asleep with that weird chess piece, like,
yeah, that's an amazing
glass unicorn.
It's an amazing death. You have the carolers outside, and you're cutting from the carolers singing and everybody listening, and that sound is kind of covering what's happening in Barb's bedroom. Yeah. And he kills her with a glass unicorn little figurine. And she's asleep. He's like straddling her, and like she wakes up, and just one of his eyes is lit, and he's muttering, whispering something. And when he starts stabbing her with the unicorn, you can see there's a skull in the background, on the dressing table in the background. It's a beautifully edited sequence.
It is, and also a lot of the scenes begin on extreme close-ups of objects, which become important within that scene. So I think that scene begins with a shot of the glass unicorn, and we see him opening the door, and the glass of the figurine kind of distorts the image of him coming into the door, which is really great. But the first death, I mean, it's absolutely amazing as a sequence in terms of its editing and tension. With Claire, is it Claire?
Claire's the first, yeah.
Going towards the wardrobe in her room, and we get point of view shots from the killer's perspective from behind some sort of translucent, as I suppose, a kind of in an
it's
image
like
that recalls.
It's like a dust jacket or something, isn't it, for clouds?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a kind of a reverse image of the Psycho shower sequence, because we're seeing the victim, approach the translucent material rather than the killer's face, and then. Yeah, when he grabs her, and it's really awful. And that actually, the first victim, her corpse remains the most powerful image of the film for me, because it ends with her as well. The body unfound
in the attic, her suffocated body with the plastic still over her face. Yeah. I mean,
like
I actually
the mouth having kind of sucked
the plastic in. Yeah, I actually misremembered the characters assuming that Claire had gone home. So I had actually forgotten the fact that her father shows up and because in these kinds of films, like the characters are normally either partying or trying to kind of investigate some kind of mystery, and this film gestures at the former. It gestures at like, oh, these are kind of, it's a Christmas party or whatever.
Yeah.
But it quickly veers into the latter, and the police become very actively involved, and it almost takes on a kind of a procedural feeling as well when they start trying to trace the phone calls, and they have a character who is at the phone company trying to, like, you know, I love those old phone exchanges where they have to actually physically track down
like shelves and shelves. It's like an old library.
It's like a library, yeah.
Shelves and shelves of well, I don't know what they are, frankly, but it's really effective. The parallel cutting between
where she has
Jess on the phone,
yeah, with the phone calls that are really genuinely creepy.
And having to stay on the phone as well.
Like, they're creepy in a way that, like, the phone calls in Scream are not creepy. I know the tone of Scream is very different, but, like, again, the sense of the person on the other end of the phone being, like, completely, like, impervious to any reason or like, just being completely motiveless and completely unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I like that. And the cops are actually, they're quite funny. There's the incompetent cop.
Yeah, the one who gets tricked by Barb. Thinking the address is Falacia.
Falacia, yeah. And then you just have a sequence where the cops are just laughing. They're just, like, cracking up at this other cop, and, like, it's a long sequence.
I love those kinds of stuff. Like, I watched the Anderson tapes, the Sidney Lumet film, recently, and there's a scene in that in which, like, a character is introduced by his nickname, which is Socks, to a bunch of other thieves, and the thieves just, like, properly start taking the piss out of him because of his name. And it's like, that guy don't need no socks, he's got so much hair on his feet or something like that, and it's like, you know, he's really, like, taking him back.
Yeah.
And those kinds of scenes don't need to be included in films like this, right? And genre films like that, and they don't even, like, go the full extent to characterizing them as well, or deepening our understanding of them as characters, but somehow it makes the world or universe feel a little lived in.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And believable. And I'm all for that kind of casual inclusion of stuff.
There's also the scene where Jess's boyfriend, he's a pianist and he's trying to get accepted into some sort of, I guess he's trying to, like, earn a place in an orchestra or something. I can't remember exactly. Yeah. But he fails. His performance, his recital doesn't go as planned, and he decides to quit. And this is where this plays into the pregnancy thing. He has a new plan that he's going to quit music and get a different job, and that they're going to get married and have a baby, and she has different plans. So he comes into his recital room and destroys his piano with a sledgehammer. It's like a long scene where, again, it's another sequence where you're just like, well, I mean, I've never seen a scene like this before in a teen slasher film. And it's quite funny, and the dialogue is quite funny, and what's her name, Mrs. McHenry, has a lot of good lines where she gets like is it a dress that she gets, like, for Christmas, and she's, like, talking to herself in the bathroom. She hides alcohol all over the house. She's hidden whiskey in the cistern in the toilet.
In addition to books.
Inside books with the pages cut out. She says, like, I wouldn't wear this to have my liver out. Also
suffers the most elaborate death in the film as well, with that kind of weird hook thing that lifts her into the attic at the same time as it's killing her. I mean, I just get the sense that it's a film which is the outcome of a range of different resources and creativities, and everybody on board sort of knew what they were attempting to do and did it very well without veering into pretension or over ambition.
Yeah, it's what's also unusual about it is that it has these unusual kind of necrophilic scenes where the killer is playing with and posing Claire's corpse in the attic, which is more common in like character study films like Deranged or something like that, but we don't know the killer's identity here, so it's not a character study. But on the other hand, in later slasher films, the idea that the killer hides his victims and then poses them often so that they will ultimately be discovered by the final girl, like poses them in particular ways so that like when you open the door they fall down or something like that kind of way. But we never actually see the process of the killer actually doing that. Which I would love to see, like somebody really go about like showing the killer doing that. You know, we get a little bit of that in this.
And they position them in such a way as well that they all fall down at the right time.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So they're all like falling out of cupboards and attic trapdoors and things like that. But yeah, and even though the film gets into the action quickly, the scenes are quite slow paced. It's not. Yeah. It doesn't move quickly. It gets like the opening scene is the killer climbing up the trellis. Is it? Or it's climbing up the side of the house into the attic. And as a result, the when it's revealed to Jess at the end that the calls are coming from inside the house, it's not a twist. So that's like the urban legend. The calls are coming from inside the house, but in Black Christmas, it's not treated like a twist. In something like When a Stranger Calls, it is. You know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's a surprise to Jess, and it's a surprise
to Jess. But we've known since the opening scene that the killer is inside the house, and we've seen him kill people and so on.
And she's like, "Oh, please answer! Oh, please answer!"
Yeah, it's like, but it's also I also actually when it is revealed to her that the killer is upstairs, I think that introduces a really great empathetic scenario where she has to decide whether to go upstairs or to run out of the house, like the cop is telling her to on the phone. Yeah. And the thing is, she doesn't know whether Barb or Phyllis are alive or dead. She just knows that they're upstairs in their bedrooms, and she knows that the killer is upstairs. And it's like, well, in that situation, what is the moral choice? Like, what would you do in that situation? Would you leave your friends up there? They could be alive. You could, if you go upstairs, save them. But if they're dead and you go upstairs, you could be killed too.
And it's also like exacerbated by the architecture and geography of the house, because we see her from sort of the midpoint of the stairs, but we've also, by that point, we're quite familiar with the layout of the landing space and the hallway upstairs, and you know, the rooms going off in separate directions, and it's like, it's not only do you go up and check on your two pals, but which one do you prioritize? Yeah. You know, it's like, oh, it's horrible. Yeah. And we know where the hatch to the attic is as well in relation to the other rooms as well. And it's just like, for me, it's just like, nah, get out the house. I remember watching it with my dad when the incompetent cop says, because he's trying to get her to leave the house without actually panicking.
Yeah, he's been given very strict instructions.
He says, the killer is in the house. And then it's like, oh shit! And then,
well, to be fair to him, he does like he's been told to get her to leave the house and to not panic her. But like, you know, like really, like I think he says, if you fuck this up, I can't remember exactly the threat, but like he's made so many mistakes throughout the film that he's really like, he needs to get this right. And she's cooperating, but she's like, well, I just have to go get Phil and Barb. Like, we'll just go let them know, like, you know. And he has to tell her then that the killer is upstairs.
And I remember watching it with my dad for the first time, and he hadn't seen it in many, many years, so he was kind of watching it for the first time, and he was just like, oh, why isn't she leaving the house? And I'm like, I know, why isn't she leaving?
Yeah.
Doesn't the cop remind you a little bit of Moe from The Simpsons? It's like if Moe...
Which cop? The incompetent one?
Yeah,
oh, yeah,
as if Moe was playing Chief Wiggum.
I love the winter setting as well, because when you're cutting from the kind of cozy, warm, welcoming, kind of safe inside space to this like very kind of chilly outside space, and it sort of underlines and emphasizes the horror of intrusion. You know,
and also the practical need for them all to be together in that same space,
right?
As well. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's a great progressive rendering of female agency as well, on Jess's part, particular. Like in terms of the way she very maturely negotiates her how she communicates her needs and wants to Peter, who's kind of a shitty boyfriend actually.
Yeah.
But also how she negotiates the tricky terrain of having to deal with his disappointment and his aggression and everything else, which I think is really, really good.
I actually, when I was watching it this time, I was looking at Olivia Hussey, and I was like, what do I recognize her from? Like, I recognize her really, really vividly from something. And I just went on IMDb, and I was like, no, all these like European movies. And I was like, no. And she played Mrs. Bates in Psycho 4 at the beginning.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you didn't recognize her from Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet?
Nothing highbrow.
Oh, really? Psycho 4. Jesus.
All right, well, we move on to
a
Christmas.
So what would you give this out of 10? Is this a 10 for you?
It's a 9 or a 10, yeah.
It's a 9 for me.
Right.
Something prevents it from being a 10. I'm not sure what, but yeah, it's an excellent film.
Revisiting it this time, I was I liked it a lot more than I was anticipating that I would. You know.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like, I remembered it being excellent, but I really, really liked like the way it was shot, and like you're saying, the performances and its kind of idiosyncrasies. Yeah, I think it's a great film. All right, so we move on to A Christmas Story.
Ho, ho, ho! And what's your name, little boy?
Hey, kid! Hurry up, the store's closing.
Come on! Listen, little boy, we've got a lot of people waiting here, so get going!
What do you want for Christmas, little boy?
My mind had gone blank. Frantically, I tried to remember what it was I wanted. I was blowing it.
Come on, kid. How about a nice football?
Football? What's a football? Without conscious will, my voice squeaked out,
Football. Okay, get him out of here.
a football? Oh, no!
Okay,
What was I
there
doing?
it
Wake up, stupid! Wake up! No!
No, I want an officer right undercover and I shoot you in a jet with my laser rifle.
You'll shoot your eye out, kid. Merry Christmas. Ho, ho, ho.
All right, so the next film we're covering on this episode is yet another film by director Bob Clark. His 1983 period Christmas comedy, A Christmas Story, which is set in Indiana at some point between the late 1930s and the mid 1940s. So it's kind of post-depression to post-war. And there's a lot of debate about when exactly it's set, because there are certain things that indicate that it can't be later than this date, but other things that indicate that it can't be any, earlier than this or whatever. So a lot of the specific cultural reference points are sort of mutually incompatible. But anyway, so sometime between the late 30s and the mid 40s, it focuses on a boy named Ralphie, who's I think he's about 12, is he? Who is, the thing that he wants more than anything else is a BB gun for Christmas.
A Wright Rider 200 shot air rifle.
Yeah. And he's trying to convince his parents to buy him this for Christmas. And that's kind of more like a background kind of,
that's the sort of overarching.
I wouldn't even call it the thing that ties it all together, because I don't think it does. It exists as a kind of it exists as kind of like an ambient kind of background to what we actually get in the scene for scene level, which is vignettes.
Yeah,
which are,
it's a macro structuring device, and yet within the time scale of the movie, we get, as you said, disparate, otherwise, vaguely connected vignettes that take place during that time frame. But it's narrated by adult Ralphie, who we never get to see.
So it's based on a novel, a 1966 novel by Gene Shepard called "In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash," which is I believe, a lightly kind of fictionalized autobiography, stories from his childhood. And he actually narrates the film as well. The author, Gene Shepard, is the voice of adult Ralphie. And he delivers it kind of, it's kind of like wry and kind of like sardonically overstated voiceover. Apparently it inspired The Wonder Years, but I think The Wonder Years is more saccharine than this. This
reminded me very much of what I remember, which isn't much.
But the tone I think is different though. The Wonder Years is much more saccharine, this is not. This doesn't come across as syrupy at all. It comes across as like kind of like lightly sarcastic, and there's a lot of irony in the narration. I actually love the narration in this.
Yeah, and the way the narration explicates his feelings in a way that, with a vocabulary and with a maturity that he wouldn't have had access to at that time, if you know what I mean.
Right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Young Ralphie. So it's like retroactively making it into a self-aggrandizing sort of novelistic enterprise.
Yeah.
Did you like it? Had you seen it before?
I had seen it before, yeah, and I actually really enjoy it. And I was... Okay, so this is a film that I never heard of until I was like in my 20s. So this is like a Christmas classic in North America. They even do, I think on TNT or one of those channels, every Christmas they do a Christmas Story marathon where the film is played on repeat for 24 hours.
Wow.
So like it's like a canonical Christmas classic in North America that doesn't seem to have exported here at all. Like, and I had never heard of it as a kid. It had never played on television that I had seen. It had never, like, of all those films that play every single Christmas, this was not one of them. But when I did watch it the first time, and again this time, I recognized a lot of the jokes and the visuals from having seen them referenced and parodied in, you know, shows like Family Guy and The Simpsons and Friends and things like that.
Right.
Like, because it's such a staple in North America that it's seeped its way into pop culture that has, you know, exported to this side of the world. Right. Had you heard of it or seen it or heard anyone talk about it? Or
I was familiar with this. I hadn't seen it, but I was familiar with the film through my, let's say, decade-long membership, ongoing membership of the GodfatherTrilogy.net, which is now formerly the GodfatherTrilogy.net, which is now GangsterBB.net, a message forum that predated the Facebook and Twitter days, on which I misspent a lot of my youth. And, you know, that was a message forum that was comprised primarily of North Americans in their, let's say, mid-40s onwards. Mm-hmm. And some of the members on there were very old indeed, and so, like, old enough to be sort of Ralphie's age, let's say.
Okay.
And for them, it was like, you know, the gospel. I mean, for me, it was always Home Alone growing up.
Yeah.
That had always been the childhood Christmas film that had exported and you know, kind of defined my relationship as a kid to Christmas. This, I mean, like, I wonder if a large part of the reason why it didn't export to overseas is because it is so period specific. Right.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, and like I was wondering about that. Like the tagline on the poster is a tribute to the original traditional 100% red-blooded, two-fisted all-American Christmas. And I do wonder if it is that aspect of it that it feels like this is a very specific moment in American history. It's not particularly universal in the way that Home Alone is, even though, like, I mean, how universal can Home Alone be? Like, we don't live in, you know, houses or neighborhoods like that. But
well, we'll come back to that actually in the Home Alone segment. With regard to, you know, how it sort of defined my understanding of America actually when I was a kid. But no, this has a rambling, episodic, anything goes feel to it. It reminded me a little bit of Woody Allen's more sort of broader, templated narratives, like Broadway, Danny Rose, stuff like that. And it's interesting to hear you mention that it made its way, it permeated American culture and pop culture to the degree where you were recognizing this time round certain moments and scenes. I wasn't aware of any of that, right? Because I wasn't on the lookout for stuff like that. But I did note early on there's a scene in which the kids are forcing... It reminds us a little bit of like the pigeon killing scene in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. You know, like when Jim Carrey's character Joel is remembering this like really cruel, brutal act that his pals put him through. When they wanted him to like hammer this, I think already dead pigeon, if I recall it correctly, which underlines like, you know, the cruelty that's inherent in a lot of childhood stories, I guess. But the reference that I was meaning to make is the scene in which they force one of the other kids to put his tongue against the pull when it's really cold, which reminded me of Dumb and Dumber.
Right, yeah, which is, I believe that is a reference to A Christmas Story in Dumb and Dumber. Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, I'm glad
it's not as graphic as it is in Dumb and Dumber. the prosthetic tongue. Apparently, they had a little hole in the pole in A Christmas Story that was had some air suction in it, so he could safely put his tongue against that and it would stick.
Right.
But so I mean, it's so that, as I said, like the kid's efforts to get to convince his parents to buy him a BB gun. In my memory, that took up quite a bit of the running time of the film, and it actually doesn't. It's like a lot of it, the vignettes are not, like the narration periodically refers back to it, but the vignettes are not really related to that at all. Like, you have a series of them. Okay, so one in which the kids are debating whether if you lick a pole in winter, your tongue will stick or it won't stick, and one of the kids, he dares him, and then he double dog dares him, and then he triple dog dares him, and eventually he has to do it to save face, and his tongue sticks to the pole, and there's a whole thing about that. The fire department has to come and get him off the pole. Then his father wins some competition where he wins like a lamp that's in the shape of a woman's leg with a fishnet stocking.
Yeah, it's really weird,
and his mother hates it, and he loves it, and he's so proud of it, and he puts it on display in the window at the front of the house, and he's bragging about it to the neighbors and stuff. Actually, that reminds me, that lamp is in the remake of Black Christmas.
Oh, it is?
As a reference to this other Bob Clark film, so that you can see the lamp in the background in the one of the few joys of the remake of Black Christmas. So that's the second vignette, and the third vignette is when he and his family go to get the Christmas tree, and on the way back they get a flat tire, and he's helping his dad for the first time, proudly helping his dad change the tire.
Yeah.
And his dad accidentally hits the hubcap out of his hand, and the screws and bolts go flying into the snow, and Ralphie says, "Oh, fudge." But the narrator says, "But except I didn't say fudge, I said the other word, the unthinkable word." And he gets into trouble for saying fuck.
Which really reminded me of Robert Redford in All Is Lost. The one line he has in that film, when he's just like, and he fucks it up. He's just like, fuck. Would be interested to know if that was a conscious reference back to this film. Probably not.
Probably not. The fourth segment is he's sending away for a little orphan Annie decoder ring. And then he's decoding the number sequence that's given on the Little Orphan Annie radio show, and it turns out that he says he had to drink so much Ovaltine to save up enough coupons or whatever to send away for this thing, and then the message turns out to be sure to drink your Ovaltine. And it's like this like moment of growth for him. It's like, oh, it's just an ad. It was just a commercial, a lousy commercial, and he's so like disappointed, and it's like, his illusions about the world have been shattered.
Yeah.
It's very good. Then his mother, accidentally on purpose, probably, breaks the lamp, and there's a whole thing about the father trying to fix the lamp again, and their parents having a fight. And then the last of the kind of the unrelated, segments is, there's a local bully named Scott Farkas, which is such a good name. Farkas is derived from the Hungarian word for wolf, and the theme from Peter and the Wolf plays whenever he appears. Scott Farkas, who's very, I mean, that bully, he seems like a kind of like the bullies in The Simpsons, kind of like a Nelson Muntz kind of character, seems to be kind of inspired by that. But he hits Ralphie with a snowball, and Ralphie's crying, and then he's taunting him because he's crying, and Ralphie just snaps and just beats the shit out of him.
Yeah.
Which is great.
And while he's beating the shit out of him, his sort of expletive-free mutterings seem to me to be very similar to Joe Pesci in Home Alone. That fidget.
That's true, yeah. That was all scripted apparently, and because the actor Darren McGavin, who plays Mr. Parker, Ralphie's father, is having a kind of like a war of attrition with the boiler in the basement, and he's like going down there, and he's like, you can hear him cursing out of the basement, but apparently McGavin had problems ranting like that without actually swearing, so there was the nonsense words that he says were scripted to help him to actually, if he sticks to the script, then he won't curse. But then after that, then it kind of it kind of circles back around to the BB gun storyline.
Yeah.
And his last, his tactics so far have been to try to kind of get such good grades in school that his parents will have to get him whatever he wants for Christmas. Yeah. Everybody keeps telling him that he'll shoot his eye out.
Yeah, that's right.
That's the catchphrase, like, a BB gun, you'll shoot your eye out. And he ends up he doesn't get the grades that he needs, so he's like, he's going to ask Santa for the BB gun, and he goes to the mall, and he and his brother are kind of being hustled. Like, there's a long queue, and the mall's very busy. It's like Christmas Eve. Everybody's trying to see Santa, and they're being kind of like, everybody's hurrying through, and Santa's kind of like a little bit intimidating and frightening.
Yeah.
And played by
like a fisheye lens,
Yeah. He's like leering into the camera. He's played by Jeff Gillen, who is the director of Deranged.
I was hoping that we would get through an episode of the Habitus without Deranged being mentioned, and we've had 3 seconds of this episode now. It's been mentioned twice.
Yeah. And Darren McGavin, obviously, I know him best as Kolchak, the Night Stalker, from the
right.
telefilms and the TV series.
Right.
It was kind of inspired the X-Files. Anyway, so he asks... That's actually a really good scene as well, where he's so intimidated that his mind goes blank. And he can't remember what he wants for Christmas, and the one thing that he doesn't want is a football. And Santa's like, "What about a football?" And he goes, yeah, okay. And then he's like, he's pushed away, and the next kid is coming up, and he comes back. And he says, "Oh, no, what I want is a Red Ryder BB gun, whatever." And Santa goes, "BB gun? Kid, you'll shoot your eye out."
It very gently sort of kicks him on his way down the slide.
Yeah. And then the final sequence is Christmas morning, where he does ultimately get the BB gun. But it's basically just that. It's like it's a series of unrelated vignettes.
It is, but they're not like chopped at or anything other. They're not like announced as like, right, and this is going to be another episode. It's got a real sweep to it, to the point at which when I was watching it, I almost forgot that he wanted the BB gun, right? I almost forgot that this was a series of unfortunate events or fortunate events leading up to one single Christmas. I mean, it could very much be like across a larger time frame, I guess, than what it is. But right. For the fact it isn't, obviously. Like,
it's the weeks leading up to Christmas.
Yeah.
But one of the thing that I'm not sure. This sort of reminded me of The Simpsons as well. Is in The Simpsons, Bart has this recurring joke where he has some sort of like vision of his own future. Like he somebody says something to him, you don't want to end up, such and such, or like I think one of the things that they do a sort of a personality test in class that tells them what they're going to be when they grow up, and the guidance counselor says, before it says that Bart's going to be a cop, and he says, "Before this, I had you pegged as a drifter," and then Bart has this cutaway to imagining himself as an adult as a drifter, and he's like, "Lousy sheriff, run me out of town. He's lost my vote." And it's always like, or he imagines himself as like a washed up alcoholic rock star, or he imagines himself as like a jailbird, or he imagines himself as like whatever it is. But it's always like a really dark vision of his own future. But when it cuts back to Bart, it's always like Bart says, "Cool," So he has this like imagines these horrible situations for himself. Ralphie has kind of imaginative kind of visions of his own future as well. Like when he gets the A+ on his work in class. Yeah. And everybody's like, like cheering him on, and or when he says "fuck" and his mother washes his mouth out with soap, and then he has this vision where he's gone blind from soap poisoning, and his parents are like, racked with guilt about having washed his mouth out with soap. I think a lot
of the scenes are based around that fantasy, those fantasies of martyrdom that kids often have. I think when they've been told off for doing something that they shouldn't have done, and the instinctive responses to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater or something and take it to it's such a logical extreme that the parents end up feeling guilty for the rest of their lives because of the punishment. I think those stubborn fantasies. I think it's really definitely handled that kind of tension in the film between what he's remembering, and he's remembering episodes because they were vivid enough to begin with to scar him in some way, and he's remembering as some kind of adventure memory. Or memory of an adventure, or something that hasn't scarred him for life. And in some ways, of course, it hasn't. But actually, there's a violence that underpins a lot of the stuff, like the cruelty of just being brought up, like the brutality of everyday life as a kid, I think, is really kind of important.
Like there's repeated shots of them having to run down this alleyway, it's the way that they come to and from school, but every time that they pass through there, they have to run because it borders Scott Farkas's house, and he's always coming over the fence and beating them up. And I mean, I think it's a great film. I'm a little sad that I never saw it as a kid, because I think it would have been a favorite of mine.
You do?
It's one of those things.
It's so culturally specific, though. I'm not sure I would have connected with it as a kid. It's weird.
Maybe not. Yeah.
Because I think I've always understood this film to be charming to adults who were either a kid at the same time at which Ralphie's a kid, or I don't connect with him that much. I think because the tension inherent in the voiceover is so consciously from the perspective of an adult. Yeah. That's not to say that I don't connect with the film. I definitely do. It was very, very different to what I was expecting, and yet I don't really know what I was expecting.
Right.
But yeah, I went into it aware that it has this kind of cultural status in North America. It's a very, very different film to Black Christmas. We should probably mention, as we did at the start of the show, that Bob Clark. I mean, Bob Clark's direction on Black Christmas is so suited to the material, and here it's also very good, but it's there's nothing to sort of ground it in this kind of genre-driven, demonstrative way, if you know what I mean. It's very kind of laid back in a way that in Black Christmas it doesn't seem to be. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this in relation to Richard Fleischer when we talked about 10 Rillington Place in the last episode.
Right.
But again, when we first mentioned doing the Journeyman series, Bob Clark was one of the first names that came to mind for me. But then when I was looking through his filmography, his later films, I don't want to watch them. These are things they're like terrible children's films that went straight to video, like Baby Geniuses and Karate Dog and this kind of stuff that I don't have any interest in watching. But he made some really great films in the 70s and 80s, aside from Black Christmas and Your Christmas Story. His the horror film that he made before Black Christmas, which is alternately known as Death Dream or Dead of Night, is amazing. It's like a George Romero kind of political, like a political horror movie about a commentary on the Vietnam War and PTSD. He also made a really cool Sherlock Holmes Jack the Ripper film called Murder by Decree in 1978.
Okay.
And he also directed other very popular films that I haven't seen, like the Porky's films, one of the early post Animal House sex comedies.
But again, very sort of culturally specific to America, and I feel like
him in general, or Porky's.
Porky's.
Oh, maybe so. I don't know. I mean, some but maybe you could you not say the same thing then about American Pie?
Yes,
but that was a huge hit over here.
It was. I didn't connect with it so much though.
Oh really? I was the perfect age for American Pie when it came out. I was like 14, 15.
Yeah, I was just a little bit younger than that.
Right, yeah.
So but no, it's a good film. I'd like to see it again, maybe without the burden of knowing I had to kind of formulate an opinion on it. So next Christmas I'll watch it again, maybe.
Right. But I mean, it was funny because I watched when I was before I watched it, I typed up what I remembered as being kind of the broad plot summary. And what I wrote was, in Indiana in the early 1940s, a boy named Ralphie tries everything that he can think of to convince his parents to buy him a BB gun for Christmas. So that was my memory of it. But then I had to change it because he doesn't. It sort of recedes into the back. It's established and then it recedes into the background in favor of these unrelated vignettes, and then it emerges again. Yeah. But it's always this kind of ambient presence in the background. Mostly coming from the narration. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked it more this time than I did the first time. I think it's really funny and really idiosyncratic and has so much personality.
It does have personality, and also like it accommodates like room and space in which to be very poignant as well, and to underscore like again, I've said cruelty so many times in this segment, but like for instance, when he thinks his dad's going to come home and give him a real like horrible telling off,
that bonding moment with his mother,
and his brother's even upset about it as well, and hiding under the kitchen sink, I think.
Yeah,
or some kind
even though you never see this side of his father.
No, you never see that side of it. I know, it's weird. And then like the whole film, I think it's not really a coming of age film. It's not really a rite of passage film, but the whole film is based around readjusting to a reality that you thought was very different.
Yeah.
So, for instance, when he says fudge, and he thinks he's going to get a real telling off, and actually the point of that scene is he proves himself to his father in terms of his masculinity more than helping out changing the tyre wood, I think.
Right.
Because his dad just gives a kind of a wry grin. He's not really that fussed, which is actually a moment that I relate to. A car-bound moment in which I swore way before I was of an age where I should have known about words like that, and apologising immediately after and being told that it was okay. You know, I thought it was. But
actually the scene where he gets into the fight with the bully as well. That's the scene where they think that the dad is going to come home and kill Ralphie.
Yeah.
It's the bully scene. Yeah, but then his mother downplays what happened and says, "Oh, Ralphie got into a fight," and he says, "Well, what do you mean a fight?"
Yeah.
And she says, "Oh, you know how boys are," and then she references something in the newspaper, and then she just kind of like pats Ralphie on the shoulder, and
the whole thing
it's a very tender kind of moment where he bonds with his mother, because I mean, like, we're saying it's not a coming of age film, but it does have these little tiny moments where it's like, oh yeah, okay, he stands up to the bully and realizes that that's what you have to do with bullies, and he has that bonding moment with his mother. He has the decoder ring moment where he realizes that his illusions are kind of shattered.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the film, when he has his BB gun, what happens the first time he goes outside? The BB ricochets off the thing that he's shooting at and almost takes his eye out.
But more than that, I think more than the eye thing is that his glasses are broken, which is like that's another thing. Like, you know, with like in a working class context, you're always worried about the expense of the glasses rather than the actual injury that you might incur.
Right.
No, it's a high 7 out of 10 for me.
It's a solid 8.
A solid 8. Okay.
Yeah. All right, we move on. Moving on to Die Hard 2.
Ooh.
Jeez, McClane, you all right? You want a medic?
McClane, what the hell you think you're doing out there? I'm playing John Wayne? How'd you like to spend the rest of the night in his cell?
Lorenzo, shut the fuck up and do something useful. Go seal off the street.
Hey, you can't talk to me like that.
Oh, no, Carmine? Sergeant, get this bureaucrat out of Mr. McClane's face, now.
With pleasure, sir.
Major, the men are in position, sir.
Close up the back, then we go in. Fire only on my order.
Roger that, sir.
Guess I was wrong about you. You're not such an asshole after all.
No, you were right. I'm just your kind of asshole.
Okay, so film number 4 on this episode is Die Hard 2. And this one centers again on John McClane. I think it's meant to be set the following Christmas. I think there's a reference to Last Christmas in Nakatomi Plaza. But anyway, released 2 years after the first film. John McClane is waiting at Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C. on Christmas Eve to pick up his wife, who's flying in from... She still works for the Nakatomi Corporation. She's flying in from L.A. And while he's there, a group of ex-military mercenaries led by Colonel Stewart, played by William Sadler, seizes remote control of the airport's communication and air traffic control systems, blacks out the runways, and then threatens to crash one of the many planes that are circling overhead unless a drug lord en route from South America is released upon his arrival. And with his wife on one of the planes, McClane gets involved in trying to take down the terrorists, dealing with various institutional and physical obstacles along the way. I think this is a hugely underrated film.
Well, as per the usual template of the segments on the Habitus, I don't really do that much research into what films or into how films are regarded in the wider landscape. I just assume, especially with films that, came out like 27 years ago.
Yeah.
No, hold on.
Yeah,
27 years ago.
You just assume everyone has the same opinion as you.
I just assume that my opinion is just the consensus one. So,
well, actually, I'll tell you, the one film that came out the same year as this that I recently discovered that people don't like, and I was shocked. It was Gremlins 2, the new batch.
People don't like
They don't like Gremlins 2. There was Joe Dante was talking about Gremlins, a potential Gremlins. Oh, sorry, not Joe Dante. Chris Columbus was talking about a potential, who wrote Gremlins, was talking about a potential Gremlins 3. And in the comment section under the article that I was reading, everybody was just like shitting on Gremlins 2. I love Gremlins 2. Gremlins 2 is so good. It's a great sequel.
I thought Gremlins 2 was rated as highly as the...
No, not at all, apparently.
Jeez.
I love what Joe Dante did. Anyway, we're not talking about Gremlins
2. Similar to that, I assumed, or still assume until you tell me otherwise, that Die Hard 2, otherwise known as Die Harder, is not as highly regarded as the first movie, which is like an amazing classic, but is regarded highly as far as sequels go, as action sequels go.
I think.
And what are you going to tell me it isn't?
Not really. No, I mean, obviously it has its fans, but my understanding of it is that it is. And this is something that kind of annoys me. Is often when you have a great film like Die Hard, or like say a great film like Jaws, and then you have a sequel. Like, I mean, if Die Hard is a 10 out of 10, and Die Hard 2 is like an 8 out of 10, or even a 7 out of 10, it's still good, but because it's inferior to the original, it gets it's underrated, and it gets more shit than it deserves. I think that's very much what happened here with that happened with Jaws 2. It happens with Die Hard 2 as well.
Sex and the City 2.
Sex and the City 2, of course.
Yeah.
But I mentioned Gremlins 2. I think part of the reason that people don't like Gremlins 2 is because it does something completely different. It becomes like this live action cartoon. Whereas the charge against Die Hard 2 is that it is a clone of the original.
Yeah, you can't win, right? Yeah, I mean, we'll come back to this in more detail, I think, when we discuss Home Alone 2.
Yeah, right, okay, and I think in Home Alone 2, there's a stronger case to be made in that respect. I've never understood that charge in relation to Die Hard 2, because it is completely different.
This is adapted as well from original source material that is severed from...
Right, yeah, it's based on
minutes or
58
minutes.
Yeah, based on a novel called 58 Minutes. What was the name of the novel for Die Hard? Nothing Lasts Forever. Nothing Lasts Forever was the name of the novel that Die Hard was based on. But, I mean, this... Like, what does this have in common with Die Hard? Like, okay, so it's set at Christmas, but it's set on the East Coast at Christmas. So you have snowy environment.
I mean, I would agree that it's very much modelled on the template of the first movie, though. So you've got a guy holed up in a single architectural setting with a bunch of disparate mercenaries which recall the first film. They also recall last episode's Steep Rising. Well, I mean, they don't recall. I mean, in the order I watched them, they anticipate. And... I mean, this is why, again, we'll come back to it in Home Alone, but this is why I kind of like to watch it, because I like to figure out the ways in which it reformulates the same ingredients. I mean, we've got, what's he called? Dick
Thornburg. Yeah, the reporter from the first film.
Dick Thornburg, played by William Atherton, who happens to be somehow on the same flight as Bonnie, John McClane's wife, played by Holly McClane.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is that played by Bonnie Bedelia. Yeah. So you have the basic setup. Okay, so the terrorists have their own mission, which is to secure the release of this Colombian drug lord who's coming from a country called Valverde, which is the fictional South American country that was used in Arnold Schwarzenegger's Commando. I don't know why they use that. Right. But in order to give McClane, like, Holly has to be on one of the planes.
Yeah.
Right. So he needs the personal connection, but then you have Holly on the plane, so she needs something to do on the plane. So that's where you have the introduction of Dick Thornburg again, and you have their antagonistic relationship. And I actually think they have a great dynamic, and that B plot on the plane is actually a highlight of the film. And she's given a lot more to do, I think, here than she is in the first film, where she's just one among many hostages. I mean, she's one among many here as well, but
of course, yeah.
But I disagree. I don't think this is a clone of the original. I don't think it even does what Home Alone 2 does, which is riff on the original very much. Like, you don't have... McClane is not trapped here. He's not... He gets involved, but he's not...
It's true. It's almost like McClane as a character functions as a means by which to make this film into a clone, and at every opportunity or at every stage he meets an obstacle. So, like, it seems to me, after every single action scene in which McClane's involved in, he's then, like, sort of reset to, like, a bystander or an observant of, like, the control rooms, or meeting the airport bureaucracy, or some, like, overzealous cop, and the mechanisms by which he's just thwarted. Like, he's just not involved in the action to the point at which he wants to be.
I listened to Rennie Harlan's director's commentary on the DVD, and he made an interesting point about that, and that is because obviously it's the same in the first film as well, except in the first film the cops are, like, comically incompetent. And so and the FBI are, like, incompetent in their arrogance. In this, it's more like it's just, like, really hectic and busy at the airport, and they're not incompetent. They're just, like, sort of outclassed, or they're just not ready for something so unusual to happen. But he says that you need McClane to be on his own. Like, he needs to be isolated, and although, like, he can't just be part of, like, a big group that's cooperating to solve the problem. He has to be kind of an outsider, but he has to try to get help, and he has to be willing to get help. So, because otherwise he feels like a loose cannon, or like he feels arrogant. So he needs to be reaching out and want the cops to help, which I thought was I thought was quite insightful, because that is the case in 1 and 2. But I mean, on the level of, like, what actually happens scene for scene in this film, it is not retreading ground that was covered in Die Hard. I mean, even like I said, like, it's set at Christmas, but, like, the first one was Christmas in LA. This is Christmas in Washington DC in the middle of a snowstorm. Like, the iconography is completely different. The mercenaries, like, William Sadler is not, like, a retread of Hans Gruber. And I think the
well, yeah, but it's schema plus variation, though, is it not? Like, of course, it's
at a very, very, very abstract level, but like this is like the Daniel Espinosa film that came out earlier this year, Life, where everybody said it was an Alien clone, because it follows, like, the same kind of, like, basic abstract textual model that Alien does. But I mean, by that logic, then Alien's not the first film to use that textual model, so it would be like The Terror from Beyond Space, and nobody calls Alien a rip-off of what it
go on, Bobby. I love it when you dismantle the predicates from which critical consensus.
You can't, like, to criticize a film for following an abstract textual model is like a generalized, rejection of, like, genre.
I know what you mean. Of course, I completely agree. I mean, I'm not even praising it because of it. It's just, for me, it's a neutral comment, though.
Okay.
Like, it is very much following a model that is set by the first film, because it's made for commercial reasons. It's not made because Rennie Harlan was, like, as an author, interested in delving into the psychology any deeper into John McClane, I'm guessing.
Right.
No,
I mean, like, I understand.
I'm saying all of this is neutral.
Yeah, no. I just don't agree that it is that it takes the structure of Die Hard and all of the elements of Die Hard and then just varies them slightly. I think it is way more different than it is the same. And I don't really understand, because what specifically about it is the same? Like, the characters. I mean, the characters that he interacts with, they're not just like, oh, this character, like, in the way that Home Alone 2 is, where it's like, this character is like the pigeon lady is like Old Man Marley, and that's not we'll get to that. But I mean, I think it's interesting to have these two films back to back in this episode, because I just I've never seen what other people see in this, and it just always seems like when it's argued that Die Hard 2 is a clone of Die Hard, it can only be argued at this abstract level that then has to be generalized to genre as such.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I mean, even this discussion now, as far into it as we are, makes me want to watch Die Hard 2 again.
Okay.
Like, and I find it like endlessly watchable. I think both movies are endlessly watchable. I mean, I love the first one. I also kind of love the second one. And part of that appeal is the fact that it does sort of rework the first in terms of story, in terms of, you know, abstract architectonics.
Yeah,
and
because I mean, like,
that is the variations that it does play on that. So, you know, you've got introductions of new types of characters, not just characters, but like, you know, Dennis Franz plays a cop here who, you know, just can't stand McClane, antagonistic towards him, and yet, like, we're never really, I don't think we're ever really encouraged to, like, find Franz's character, like, disagreeable or anything. It's kind of,
I quite like him.
It's a kind of a reasonable position that he takes, I think.
That's what I mean. It's like, they're not, the authority figures here are not really depicted as incompetent.
McClane is kind of just a pain in the arse.
Except maybe the SWAT team, who are a little bit, they're not very good. Particularly when Robert Patrick's character, one of the terrorists,
mercenaries,
I always find this scene really funny where he stops the moving walkway, and the guy's like, "Hey, buddy, turn that back on," and it's like, "Hey, I'm talking to you. What do I look like to you?" And he just turns around and says, "A sitting duck," and shoots him in the head. And then all the SWAT team like starts shooting at him, and he dives behind this little like cardboard box thing. It's like that's really unwise. He's like right out in the open. That whole firefight takes place with basically like no use of cover.
See, so that scene, for instance, they're undercover, the mercenaries, as decorators, and they're in this unfinished part of the terminal, which is very much reminiscent of the unfinished floors in the Nakatomi Plaza, right? When he finds himself in there. Come on, it's the same film. And I also really laugh at that scene as well. Like, I love though it just gets so busy. There's a lot of slow motion action in this as well whenever the shit hits the fan. So like that moment where Robert Patrick's diving behind a cardboard box, the whole thing plays out in slow motion, but it's like fast cut slow motion, so you never really feel like it's slow motion. If you know what I mean. It's not like the Untouchables baby pram going down the stairs slow motion.
Right.
It's like.
Do you think that the line that McClane delivers right before that scene when he's coming through the air vent, when he says another what does he say? Another air vent, another more terrorists, whatever. What? Like, how can the same shit happen to the same guy twice?
Yeah.
Do you think that people just took that and then just assumed that the film was the same? I'm going to stop harping on this, but they do kind of up the ante in this film. Like the terrorists are much more evil, I think, than they are. Or I mean, I know that in Die Hard 1, the plan is to kill all the hostages when they blow up the roof, but it never actually gets to that point. Whereas in this, it does when they bring down one of the planes. And
Colonel Stewart's sort of taunted. Really, he doesn't have to do it. He doesn't plan to do it, but he does it as a.
To what the scene that we just talked about, where they're trying to reestablish communications with the airplanes using a satellite array that they're going to like hack into or whatever. And he's aware of this. He anticipated it rather. But that scene was really controversial. The Fox executives didn't want to do it. Rennie Harlan said that it had to be done. You had to show that the terrorists were capable of this. They were worried that it was going to be like the famous King Kong spider pit sequence that they ended up cutting from the original King Kong, where the film crew falls into the ravine and they get eaten alive by giant spiders, where people were just so shocked by the sequence that they apparently couldn't talk about anything else or pay. It just took them out of the film. It was too serious, too severe. And they did shoot also interior footage of the passengers actually dying and like burning alive and like flying around the place as the plane crashed, and the execs drew the line at that. So, no.
I mean, you get that shot of McClane on the runway examining the wreckage.
He finds
the baby's
he finds the doll, and that was actually established as belonging to a little girl on the plane in one of the scenes that they also cut, because you know the way you do have the scene with like the old woman on the plane, and she's kind of nervous, and the flight attendant is comforting her and everything, and it's really like the plane exploding is a terrifying image.
It is. It's also.
It kind of serves the same plot function as the murder of Mr. Takagi in Die Hard 1, but it's like such an amplified scale of people who are like, you know, Takagi is like a representative of the business. Obviously, he doesn't deserve to be killed, but his he has that, like, you know, he's the authority figure in that situation where these people are just like innocent people.
There's a line as well in Die Hard where, is it Holly who refers to Hans Gruber as just, you're nothing but a common thief.
Yeah, I am an exceptional thief.
Yeah, and he takes objection to it, whereas this is like, you know, global terrorists, basically.
Right. Well, that's the other thing, is that in Die Hard, they are thieves posing as terrorists. In this film, they're not thieves. In this film, they're ex-military mercenaries who are hired by, like, this is actual terrorism, like political terrorism.
Yeah. Welcome to the 90s.
It's also much more gruesome than Die Hard 1.
Yeah.
You have like in that sequence in the unfinished terminal, the squibs that they use are so like gruesome. They're like exploding out their backs, and you have the scene where of course, also there's a big plot twist in this film that there is not in Die Hard 1.
I thought the plot twist happened a lot sooner than it does. Like we're getting 90 minutes into the film.
Yeah, it's a third act.
Used. Yeah,
it's a third act. Yeah, it's a third act plot twist where the now it's. I was trying to figure out exactly what the plan was. So the idea was that Colonel Stewart and what is his name?
Esperanza.
No, Esperanza is
Major Grant.
Major Grant.
By
okay.
John Amos.
Yeah. So
who leads like this
a commando unit.
Yeah.
That are. So you have to assume that Stewart and Grant, who are in cahoots, knew that Grant and his unit would be sent to take care of Stewart, and you have to assume that they knew that was just the procedure.
It's true, but the soldiers have also been replaced at the last minute within
that
unit.
One of the soldiers has been replaced. Yeah. And Grant has to kill him, and he cuts his throat, and it's really like needlessly gruesome moment.
It is. It's always removed when it screens every other week on ITV.
Right.
Here in England.
Right.
They always just remove it, and it because he has a line. Then I wouldn't have to do this.
Yeah, if you'd been with us at this point or whatever in this other mission, then you'd be part of the team, and I wouldn't have to do this. And he just leans over and slashes his throat, and they all sort of like coldly just like sit there watching.
Yeah, and when it's screened on TV, he says the line, and then it just cuts to it afterwards, and it's just like, well, what happened there?
Oh, right, they're not even show him. They couldn't even show him reaching across because it's all in one shot. Yeah. And then one of my favorite bits in the film is when McClane is fighting with. It's actually shortly before that scene where McClane is fighting. They've set up. The terrorists have set up their base in a church near the airport, under which the like communication cables and so on run into the airport or whatever, so they can hack into it. But he's fighting one of the sentries there, and the sentry's like trying to stab him with his knife, and McClane just like is reaching for anything that he can find, and he grabs an icicle dangling from the building behind him and stabs the guy in the eye.
Yeah.
And just like snaps it off. It's again like really like the sort of thing like you never see that in the commentary track. Rennie Harlan was talking about that as well. That like not so much the gore, although he did mention that, but more so the language. Like fuck is like every other word in this film.
Yeah.
And it's just like he says like now when he reads a screenplay, he's always kind of surprised when he sees that word. You know, because in action films, because they try to kind of like where they can, they try to keep it below the certain kind of rating limit. You know?
But it is very, it's very in line with early 90s action films, though, right? Like I think Commando, if I recall correctly, that says lots of swear words.
Very much so. Yeah, 90s action films were
like Demolition Man. Is that another one? Like Cliffhanger. There's loads of
even a lot of the films that came out after Die Hard that were like Die Hard established such a new sort of template that films that do follow the template as opposed to Die Hard 2, such as Under Siege, which was like Die Hard on a battleship, and Sudden Death with Van Damme, which was like Die Hard in a football stadium, and
Speed.
Speed was called Die Hard on a bus. I think that's stretching it a little bit, but it's like, I can see it. Okay, Air Force One, because to me, like the fundamental thing is like the thing is taken over, whether it's the building or the plane or the boat or whatever, and there's one person who is not like rounded up, and he's loose inside, and he's like an inside agent. And that's true of like Air Force One. It's true of Under Siege. It's true of Sudden Death. It's true of Die Hard. Not true of Die Hard 2. But anyway, he says like that. You know, when you're making an action film, you're always trying to find like unusual weapons to use in the fights, because you don't want everything to just be guns, fists, and knives. So he's like, in the scene where he intercepts the two guys who are rooting through the baggage in the baggage area, he uses a golf club, and
that's right.
He uses the icicle and stuff like that. And that kind of reminded me of like the way that it's with horror films, like with slasher films, with like Friday the 13th or something like that, where it's like the idea is like you have to come up with new ways to kill people. Because every kill has to be kind of novel and unique. You can't just have like a machete every time or whatever.
Yeah. Well, Coppola said that with regard to The Godfather as well. Like, he needed to make he knew that movie was going to have a lot of deaths, and he needed to make each one cinematically unique.
Yeah.
And so, you build set pieces around them to make each one sort of vivid and memorable, I guess.
Actually, do you know what my favourite moment of gore in this film is? Which when one? Major Grant gets sucked into the engine at the end. It's so good. I always love that.
Yeah.
And I mean, I love, like, with another commonality between action films and horror films is that, and this, I think Die Hard kind of established this as well, because Die Hard kind of introduced a type of hero that was vulnerable in a way that maybe, like, the characters that Schwarzenegger or Stallone had been playing in the years leading up to it were not. So he's, like, drenched in, like, dirt and blood by the end of the film. It's like, like we talked about Inside a few weeks ago, it's a similar kind of thing, like in a really like brutal horror film or like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something like that. You want your protagonist to be like drenched in blood and like really put through the ringer by the end of the film.
With Schwarzenegger, I mean, like, he ends the film full of paint that he's applied to himself, or like topless because he's taking his top off. Like McClane in Die Hard, the first one, there's that scene where Gruber directs his henchman to shoot the glass. So he ends up fucking cutting his feet horribly. Like, I love the jumper that he starts the film with, by the way, that he's wearing. I want a jumper like that. It's got a collar on it, but it hasn't got any buttons on it, which I really like. But like, you're right. I mean, like, he gets bloodied, he gets dirt, and also like there's a vulnerability to Willis's performance as well. Like, he's wisecracking and he's hard as nails, but he's also like, just making it up as he goes along. He's not like some karate, like kung fu expert, right? Like, he'll bite, he'll get them in headlocks. Like, he tries to use his surroundings to his advantage. I love the scene in which they lock him in the cockpit of the plane on which Esperanza's landed.
That's great.
And they throw them all of their hand grenades, and just that shot of like when the first 2 or 3 hand grenades like start to fall onto the floor, and just his like face, like it's so amazing.
It's really, really good,
shot, because he's just like, oh fuck, like, it's got so many great, like, really, really great textbook, I would say, suspense set pieces here. So when Esperanza's plane is landing and McClane has gone through the ducts beneath the runway and he's coming up, and he could feasibly kind of just go back down, but he squeezes so far that
he's coming up through the grate on the runway.
And so it's easier to go all the way through the grate rather than to go back down. And the cuts back and forth from close-ups to his face, looking at the tyres coming towards him, and a close-up of the tyres going towards him. I think it's really, really great.
That's a great scene,
and a similar thing happens when they lock him in the cockpit as well, and he needs to eject. And it's like, how have they not gone off yet?
Yeah, I know they have. That's a similar thing I was thinking about when at the end, because I think the final scene is great as well when he takes the helicopter in and jumps onto the plane's wing. They actually had to build a special plane with wings that were at a more sort of suitable angle, because planes' wings are actually at a more sort of they're more elevated, and it would be hard for the actors to actually stand on the wings, so they built this plane with like kind of flatter wings, and he jumps down onto the thing, and Major Grant comes out, and then McClane manages to get him sucked into the engine, and then Colonel Stewart comes out.
I love what Stewart says when he comes out. Hey McClane, I'm the main event.
And he gets like, but that whole, like, how long is that runway? I mean, there's people were talking about that when there was a similar sequence at the end of Fast and Furious 6, where there's like a 10-minute sequence where the plane is just like speeding down the runway.
No, it's true. And also, like, would that happen? So when the plane eventually starts to take off, and he's let the fuel come out of it, because the last thing he does before Stewart kicks him off the wing is to pull open the vent. So
apparently Rennie Harlan says that's all fictional. That's not the way planes are fueled at all.
Not since this film,
right?
And he goes, you think, oh shit, he's the plane's going to take off, and he just goes, yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker, and he throws the light onto the fuel, and the plane is actually in midair at that point. It's separated from the ground,
right? and it goes up the
flame goes along the fuel line, and then it like jumps onto the plane. Kind of. That wouldn't happen though, would it?
Well, I don't know, but it's
Yeah, Rennie Holland didn't mention that in his director's commentary, did he?
He actually points out all of the things that are unrealistic, but that's also the first time that he uses the catch what became at that point his catchphrase "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," because in Die Hard 1 it has like meaningful context because Hans Gruber is calling him cowboy, and he's like, you're just another American who saw too many movies, thinks he's John Wayne, and he says I'm more partial to kind of Roy Rogers actually, and he's like, do you really think you stand a chance, Mr. Cowboy? And he signs off with "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," which is, it's a cowboy phrase, but like, there's no reason for him to say it in Die Hard 2, 3, 4, or 5. It's just like, this is just something that McClane says when he gets the better of the bad guy.
I was going to ask you briefly if we may kind of, unless you've got something urgent to say about this film, but like, what do you make of the third film?
I actually used to prefer the second to the third, but I actually think the third is a better film. Yeah. I just think that the third
drifts more into sort of Lethal Weapon territory, right? With the racialized team up.
Like it was written. It was a spec script called Simon Says that was sold to 20th Century Fox, and Joel Silver he considered using that spec script as the basis for Lethal Weapon 4, but instead, like, it was going to be repurposed with Riggs and Murtaugh, but instead it was repurposed for Die Hard 3. But yeah, I agree. Like that.
I loved Die Hard with a Vengeance.
It's a great film.
I haven't seen it in many years, but like I really, really liked it. It's the film that I always feel is responsible for teaching me that is it the 36th president of the United States was Chester A. Arthur?
Right.
Is it 36?
I can't remember. All the little puzzles in it are great. Yeah, particularly the one where they have to fill the water bottles.
Yeah, I still don't know how they do that.
But yeah, I mean, I like Die Hard 2 as well because one of the things that
he's the 21st American president. Okay. Sorry, Chester A. Arthur. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is terrible about Die Hard 4, which overall I think is just kind of like a middling action film, and Die Hard 5, which is just abysmal, is that it doesn't feel like the same character. These could just be like generic Bruce Willis action movies, because he's made action movies outside of the Die Hard series. So like, what is it specifically that makes these Die Hard films? And I don't think it's like, as a lot of people do think, that they need to set it at Christmas. That's not enough. Like, it's the characterization, and I do think in this film in particular there is this attention paid to the characterization, like I mentioned. Like, his relationship, his antagonistic relationship with kind of incompetent or uncooperative authority has to happen to establish that he's not like an arrogant renegade. Or like the scene where he rejects the rental counter clerk who is like, she's been helping him, and then she asks him out for a drink.
Oh, I love that though. Like,
he shows her his wedding ring, and it's like, okay, well, we're establishing his loyalty to his wife. It's like the film gives thought to all of these moments, and it ensures that the character is honored. And like, according to Rennie Harlan in the commentary, like, he and the producers and Bruce Willis like really thought about these scenes and were like, would John McClane do this? And like, who is John McClane, and like, how would he behave in this situation was a central kind of thing, which seems to have been thrown out the window in the later films.
I love that moment when the moment just before she asks him, like, hey, I finish in an hour, what you doing, or something like that, when he's just been talking to the cop from the first film, Reginald Johnson. What's
Al Powell.
That's right. So he mouths, he doesn't say, but he gets off the phone, John McClane, and he says to the rental clerk, like, thank you, but he doesn't say it, he doesn't verbalize it, he just mouths it, and she goes, you're welcome, but again, she doesn't actually verbalize it, she just mouths it. I think it's a real nice sexual chemistry there.
I mean, I think it's a great action film. I think if it weren't branded as a Die Hard film, it would, have a higher reputation than it does. I think it's one of the best action films of the early 90s. I don't really have anything else to say about it. A little bit of trivia. This film was the cause of the first ever product placement lawsuit for a film. Black & Decker had paid to have their cordless drill featured in a scene with Bruce Willis, and the scene got cut. And they sued 20th Century Fox, and it was settled out of court.
Because he uses the drill to
I don't know. I don't think it was cut for any particular reason, just it was part of a scene that didn't make it in. and it was a $150,000 claim that was settled out of court.
Speaking of product placement, it might be a good opportunity to move now onto Home Alone 2, because that seems to be the first instance that I can recall of me watching a movie that was very, very heavily sort of influenced and maybe even made because of product placement.
All right, so let's move on then to Home Alone 2, Lost in New York.
Whose is this?
That's Brooke's.
This is Megan. Brooke, give this to Brooke. This is Kevin. Give this to Kevin.
Give this to Kevin. Give this to Kevin. Give this to Kevin. Kevin.
Give this to Kevin. Give this to Kevin.
Give this to Kevin. Give this to Kevin.
Give this to Kevin.
Give this to Kevin. Here you go, Kevin.
Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here. Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here. Kevin's not here.
Kevin's not here. Kevin's not here.
What?
All right, so film number 5 is Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. So in this one, instead of flying with his family to Florida for Christmas, due to a series of mix-ups at the airport in Chicago, Kevin McAllister, played by Macaulay Culkin, winds up alone in New York with his father's wallet. He cons his way into a luxurious hotel using his dad's credit card, in the process arousing the suspicions of a nosy concierge. Is that what you call Tim Curry's character? I'm not sure if that's the correct term.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Harry and Marv, formerly known as the Wet Bandits, now redubbed the Sticky Bandits, have escaped from prison, are loose in New York, and are planning to rob a toy store called Duncan's Toy Chest on Christmas Eve. Kevin bumps into them, evades them, learns of their plans, and also learns that Duncan's Toy Chest donates all of the money it takes in on Christmas Eve to a children's hospital, so he feels compelled to intervene and foil Harry and Marv's plans. Meanwhile, his parents are trying to locate him, and Tim Curry's character in the hotel is trying to discover the truth about this kid who has seemingly kind of blagged his way into a hotel room. You like this film?
I love this film. I remember getting quite a bit of stick when I included it on my top 100 movies ever made a few years back. People couldn't a personalized list of my favorite ever movies, and people really couldn't believe that it had been included, like to the point where I was receiving like fucking direct messages and stuff. Nothing as grave as death threats, I'm pleased to say, but I was actually receiving quite a few direct messages to ask if it was like, their in all seriousness, which it very much was, or if it was some kind of prank, which it wasn't. I like it. Okay, so we were discussing with regard to Die Hard 2, the sort of mechanics of building a sequel, modelling a sequel on the template and model set by the first film. Die Hard 2, as we established, is very much debatable with regard to that. You don't think it is. I think it very kind of much is, and that we both loved it. But this film is very much built on the foundation set by the first movie. So the first movie came out in 1990. I saw this in 92 at the cinema at the Newcastle's old Odeon. I say old because it's no longer with us. It was demolished last year, although it was closed in, I think, early 2000s. And we mentioned with regard also to A Christmas Story of like that being so culturally specific, and maybe this film isn't so culturally specific, which is why it was able to be sort of transported to foreign markets. I'm not sure how true that is, but like the first film very much determined or influenced my understanding of America, and in terms of like American households. Like, so the McAllisters are super well off, right? Like they're like, proper like American middle class.
Yeah. Movie middle class. Yeah, where the dad is just like, he's not. It's never established that he's actually like a big player or whatever. He's not like the CEO of a corporation or something like that. He just has like a normal like office job or something like that. But yeah.
And they live in a detached property,
like a borderline mansion. Yeah,
well, I would call it a mansion. Which can accommodate many different members of the family, because they have cousins and aunties. And
remember that the house in the first film had to accommodate all of the action that took place in the house as well.
It's true. But then his brother Peter McAllister, who we never meet, has a brownstone.
No, Peter is the father. It's
sorry, Robert.
Yeah.
Sorry. So Robert also lives with his wife in a
4 or 5 story brownstone
townhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is just around the corner. The film tells us from Duncan's toy chest, which I think is playing with Manhattan geography somewhat. Let's say, but by the by, so this is a film also that informed my understanding of what New York was as a cinematic city as well, right? At the age of what would I have been, 5, 6, and subsequently for many of the years that comprised my childhood and even teenage years, because I didn't go to America and I went to New York until 2009. And there's so many different cinema and movie tour guides and tours that you can go on, and my pals and our main point of reference was Home Alone 2.
Yeah.
Right? Of all the many different films shot there and set there. Of course you got Manhattan by Woody Allen, which is a big one, but for me it was always Home Alone 2, and it very much kind of remains Home Alone 2 for me in terms of New York cinematic depictions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would
Ghostbusters kind of be up there as well?
Yeah, Ghostbusters will be up there, and I think Ghostbusters 2 in
particular, with the Statue of Liberty,
it's very much about, and also even
Ghostbusters 2 is very much about New York. It's about that's
it is, and the emerging corruption in its political machine, and its institutional machine. I don't know. I'm tempted whenever I watch Home Alone 2 to claim that it's better than the first.
Oh wow! No way.
And
I think the first is perfect.
And it's usually on the grounds. I claim that it's better than the first. It's usually on the grounds of its setting.
Okay.
I find New York a much more compelling backdrop for all of this, and that's perhaps my personal preference with regard to where I like the film to be shot. But do you think the first one's a perfect movie?
I think the first one is arguably the best film of its type ever made. I think maybe the reason that this film and Home Alone were, I'm sure there are all sorts of different vagaries that you can't really take into account, but part of it might be that the iconography of A Christmas Story, as we said, is very kind of historically specific and almost niche. Mm-hmm. And there might be sort of generational boundaries associated with it. Whereas, the when Kevin first arrives in New York in this film and he's going around to all the tourist locations, it's very much New York tourist iconography that is very exportable, and it was already kind of, in other movies and in TV shows and stuff. And
as a result of that whole sequence, he's in the airport and he's coming to terms with the fact that my family's in Florida, I'm in New York. Yeah. And in the first movie, right, which it hadn't really occurred to me until I rewatched it recently, but in the first movie, it's never really established from Kevin's point of view that his family have gone on vacation. He just thinks he's made them disappear.
That's true, yeah.
Right? Whereas this one, he's actually aware
I made my family disappear.
Yeah. Whereas in this one, he's aware that, oh God, they've gone to Florida, I got on the wrong flight somehow. And accuse, is it Darlene Love, the Christmas song, as he's going across the East River? Is it East River?
I'm not sure. Yeah, across the bridge. Because that whole sequence, he's effectively kind of our surrogate tourist kind of. He's if we go to New York at Christmas, this is where we go. Yeah. And he's doing all that, and then he checks into this plush hotel.
Yeah, the Plaza Hotel,
there's a kind of apparently Donald Trump owns. Donald Trump shows up at the in the middle.
Yeah, it's Donald Trump, isn't it? I remember watching this in the Prince Charles Theatre cinema in London. That was 2 Christmases ago.
Right.
And when Donald Trump came on, everyone kind of booed, and I was
right. But yeah, no, there's much more of like a fantasy childhood element to this, and much less of a kind of a nightmare element than there is in the first one. Like in this one, you know, checking into like the suite in the hotel, and like, you know, the guy serving him ice cream while he watches the gangster movie is like, 2 scoops or 3, so I'll make it 3. I ain't driving. Yeah, you know, there's more of that, and like one of the we're going to talk about, I'm sure, the all of the kind of parallels or the symmetries between this film and the first film that are deliberately kind of you know, they've taken sort of all of the core building blocks of the first film and then varied them. One of the things that they leave behind in the first film is the furnace in the basement that he's terrified of. There's no parallel. There's no equivalent in this film.
There's not. I suppose the closest it comes to those expressionistic camera angles and the sense of nightmarishness is the
when he's alone,
in which he's
on
alone
the streets,
at night on the edge of Central Park.
Scary out there. Ain't much better in here, kid.
Yeah, he gets propositioned by prostitutes.
Yeah, the prostitutes. Yeah,
much better in here, kid.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
But I was gonna say that the rewatching it this time, I was paying attention to all of the plot devices that are used in the setup, which I think is really, really well written. Because, okay, so it's a series of wildly improbable coincidences that constitute the setup, and they're really writing their way uphill with this. Okay, so first the family's running for the plane. Then Kevin stops to put batteries into his Talkboy, which is like a recorder playback thing. Yeah. Then when he looks up, he follows a man who's wearing a similar coat to his dad's. And then when the man that he's following runs into the plane, Kevin bumps into the woman at the boarding gate and drops his boarding pass and mixes them all up with hers.
Yeah.
And then because the plane is about to leave, they don't have time to look for his boarding pass. And then she's told by her superior to board him, but to make sure that he locates his family first. And then when she brings him onto the plane, he sees the man that he had been following from behind and goes, "Oh, there's him. That's my dad." And then she tells him to go and find an empty seat because it's been previously established that their family are not sitting together because the flight is overbooked. And then the guy sitting beside him doesn't speak English. He speaks French, but he keeps nattering to him in French. So Kevin gets irritated and puts on his headphones and listens to music so he doesn't hear the flight attendant stating what the destination of the flight is. And it must have been a difficult scenario to write, but I think that it's much preferable to have. It's better to have to accept a string of coincidences than to have to accept implausible character actions, because in all of those individual situations, the characters behave the way those characters would behave. There's nobody behaving on that flight or in that airport like really irresponsibly or stupidly, like board him, but make sure he finds his parents, and then like all that kind of stuff is.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
It's quite well written. It's quite well structured.
And similar to that, so that's like the things that the loops that they have to jump through or write their way through, if you like, in order to set up what a film.
When the setup in the first film was simple, it was very simple.
Yeah, and even this one, like, how did they sleep in again? Like, we did it again, rather than we slept in. It's because the batteries use, and which plays into how Kevin gets lost in the first place. But Peter needs batteries for what does he need batteries for again? But he takes them out of the.
He's charging his electric shaver. He plugs out the thing, and plugs it back in, and it resets to 12.
So how they sleep in, how they get left behind. There's variations of the schema. Like how they discover like Kevin's missing or he's not there.
Such a great sequence where they're passing his bag. Give this to Kevin. Give this to Kevin.
I love it when the camera goes back again and it just like Buzz just doesn't even like.
Buzz is just like staring off into space in like deep thought. Yeah, it's great.
I love Catherine O'Hara, who like I think John Hurd sadly no longer with us, and Catherine O'Hara are absolutely amazing in both films.
They're great
as a credible parental unit.
Yeah.
Now I will say I'd forgotten or hadn't realised before, let's say this is my coming of age, but I hadn't realised that Catherine O'Hara's character, Kate, is such like she's a bit of a prick in the first film, I think. Like the way I know that she's panicking and all that, but the way she kind of selfishly negotiates and communicates with like airport staff, and like the way she just like takes the phone off somebody in the first movie in the airport, and she says like pick up, and then she goes, "Who's this? Oh, sorry, she'll have to call you back." Whereas in this film, she's not as disagreeable as a character, I don't think. But I love her response when they realise like Kevin's missing, just like starts to laugh.
Yeah, it's great, yeah.
And then
she passes it to John Hurd, who's like, Kevin's not here. What?
Yeah. And then like you've got variations later on of It's a Wonderful Life, which was being played on the French TVs in Paris in the first film, dubbed into French. Now, because the family's in Florida, it's being dubbed into Spanish.
Right.
It's they're very, very aware of their sequelization and their credentials as a sequel, because Kevin watches Angels with Even Filthier Souls.
Yeah,
which, back in 1930s Hollywood, they didn't make sequels. It was a completely different business model. And
it's funny as well, actually. My brother and I have always loved Home Alone, and when I can't remember how old he was like maybe 12 or 13, maybe. We had watched Home Alone like one Christmas or whatever, and he noticed in the TV guide that Michael Curtiz's Angels with Dirty Faces was playing. Which is obviously the film that the title references, even though the Angels with Dirty Faces is nothing like the films that the trashy gangster B movie that Kevin watches in the first and second films. But he got up, it was playing at like 9 o'clock in the morning or something like that, so he actually got up early on a Saturday to watch Angels with Dirty Faces in anticipation that it was going to be at all similar to yeah, it's great.
I think the acting's all around like terrific. Like we'll get on to the Sticky Bandits in a moment, but just before I forget, I don't want to get through this segment without mentioning Tim Curry, who is marvelous as the hotel concierge. Like,
so great, like
one
of my favorite moments in the film is another throwback to the first film, is that he watches the Chuck Jones cartoon, The Grinch That Stole Christmas, in the limousine, and there's a dissolve from the Grinch's smile, his like malevolent smile, to Tim Curry's malevolent smile as he discovers that the credit card is stolen.
As a kid, that was so vivid, the dissolve, that like, 'cause there's a cross match, isn't it? I got so like, I remember that so vividly as a kid that I grew up thinking Tim Curry played the Grinch.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. As I like, just
played the Grinch in the live action film.
Yeah, it's just got like
the Ron Howard one.
Distorted in my mind, but he's really great. He has some of the film's best lines, actually, and it's a good example of somebody fully committing to a role that could have easily been quite thankless in a way. But like, another way in which the film references its own credentials as a sequel, or its own status as a sequel, is through the more frequent use in which Kevin or other characters break the fourth wall.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, like, I think you could argue he breaks the fourth wall in the first movie when he's like running upstairs away from Old Man Marley, and he's like, Rah!
Well, he also does it in the same moment as he does it in the sequel when he says, "I made my family disappear." He looks directly into the camera.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he does it again in the airport when he says, "My family's in Florida and I'm in New York."
Yeah.
And the parents break the fourth wall as well when they're running around screaming when they're late.
Yeah, in the second one,
when they run to the foot of the bed and look into the camera.
And then I suppose one of the key ways in which it varies the first film is that the wet bandits have become the sticky bandits.
Yeah.
Brings us
to... Marv has dubbed them the sticky bandits, and Harry's not really having any of it.
Yeah. I mean, Daniel's...
That was always Marv's thing in the first film as well, that they were the wet bandits. It's like, you're really sick, you know that?
Now, I remember talking to you like years ago, when you didn't think, when you were arguing that this film was nowhere near as good as the first one.
Yeah,
and one
which
of
I
the
still think.
Reasons why you thought that was that the sticky bandits, Harry and Marv, had become these kind of murderous characters rather than just like thieves.
That's their kind of by implication in the first one. Like, there's the moment before Kevin is rescued by Old Man Marley, where Harry says he's going to bite off his fingers one by one, which is like pretty severe.
Smash his face with a blowtorch.
But in this, that's true, yeah. But in this one, there's a whole thing where it's like it's not over the top enough for me to be like, because once we get to the House of Traps sequence, it's so over the top. A lot of people don't like it. A lot of people find it too violent, and I think, I mean, it's so obviously like a live action cartoon. But the sequences before that where they have him and they're trying to, the plan is like to bring him to the subway station and throw him under a train. Yeah. Says, well, I'll feel much better once we get him on ice.
Right? They've actually got a gun.
Yeah, but that's they're just planning. It's very kind of it's too realistic at that moment that these two guys are going to murder this child in the subway and throw his body on the tracks. I was like, ugh. But no, I have some other criticisms of this film. I think it's not a real integrated whole. Like, it feels like the natural antagonist in this story is Tim Curry, and that the additional B plots, the introduction of the pigeon lady and the sticky bandits, and are bolted on along with the House of Traps sequence, which is the moment where the third act of this film. I love the first two acts, and I think the third act is okay. Right. Like, once it gets to the House of Traps, it's just, a lot of it is inferior. I don't like the aesthetic of it either. Like, it's too brown, grimy, like dirty New York alleyways and like the house under construction, and it just feels miserable.
See, it always felt to me like a ready-made den, rather like, you know, when he crawls up the dust hatch, whatever it is, to get into the house. It feels like a ready-made den rather than a house that you would have to clean up after the carnage. Like, it always bothered me how, like, he has to clean everything up in the first movie. Like, how does he clean it all up but for Harry's golden tooth as well? Yeah.
I also think we've been talking a lot about the supporting characters, particularly the family, and I think one of the biggest sins this film commits is how underserved the McAllister family are. Like, they get very little, aside from Catherine O'Hara, who does get, you know, toward the end of the film she does, but the rest of it, like, because there's so much plot in this film, and there's so much, like, work to do to get the scenario going, all of that stuff at the beginning of the first film where the family is together in the house, which contains some of the best lines in the whole film.
Yeah.
Kevin, you're what the French call les incompetents.
Kevin, you're such a disease.
Look
what you did,
I wouldn't let you sleep in my room if you were growing out of my ass. Like, all of that stuff, like, we don't get any of that. We get a little bit of Buzz, and it seems kind of like tokenistic, the thing with at the beginning where Buzz humiliates Kevin at the choir recital thing.
Beat that, you little trout sniffer.
Yeah, it's I think that's really stood out to me this time. And then I think the character that just shouldn't be in the film at all is Brenda Fricker's pigeon lady, who is there, you know, as the for symmetry with Robert's Blossom of Deranged fame. Yeah, played Ezra Cobb in Deranged. She rather is I think just a terrible character. I think, like, she's a mediocre character in the first place, and because there's no time to spend on her characterization is, like, ridiculously, laughably accelerated, where she just, like, meets Kevin, they go to Carnegie Hall, and they're in the attic, and they just have, like, one conversation where Kevin completely changes her life in the space of about 3 minutes. True. Yeah. Like, I want more time with the hotel characters. I really think that the whole script should have been, like, focused around, like, Tim Curry trying to, like, basically ruin Kevin's holiday.
Don't count your chips in public, Cedric.
Yeah, they're so great.
It is.
You've been smooching with everyone. You're mistaken, sir. Yeah. There's an insane guest with a machine gun.
Yeah, the way he crawls away from that scene as well is amazing, because he's, like, pulling himself along on his elbows, like his legs just aren't moving. Like, it's as if through fright that his legs have just gone completely dead.
I mean, and I think it's kind of interesting as well that, like, and again, this comes to the fact that the plot is kind of bolted together. Like, the natural antagonist, like, so Kevin is trying to have his dream holiday on his own in New York, and Tim Curry's character is trying to foil his plans. Like, that to me is, like, the natural plot of this film. The reintroduction of the sticky, I know, obviously, for commercial reasons, like, that had to happen, but the reintroduction of the sticky bandits, the whole, like, plot with Duncan's toy chest, and the scene in Duncan's toy chest where they hide out overnight in the toy houses. It's like, that's like the same plot device used later in Bad Santa that we're going to talk about later.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, the thing is that, like, Kevin is not like, Home Alone is a home invasion film. like, this is my house, I have to defend it.
Yeah.
Okay, like, so Kevin doesn't have a choice in Home Alone.
Yeah.
In this one, it's like he intervenes for moral reasons because
he's turned into a philanthropist.
He's like a hero,
apparently. Even like,
but he's like a superhero intervening to save, like, you know, all that kind of stuff. Which I don't know. I mean, I love the film. I think it's underrated. I think it's unfairly criticized as being like just the same again, because it isn't. Like, it's again a completely different story. Obviously, it has these like rhyming elements, these symmetrical elements, but for the most part, they are funny variations. Like the fact that there's angels with even filthier souls. Like, angels with even filthier souls is hilarious. You know?
Yeah.
One other thing that doesn't make its way from the first film to the second film is Little Nero's Pizza, which is a recurring kind of thing in the first one.
It's true. Although he does. It has a great line delivery when Jim Carrey says, you know, you've got your own chauffeur and a pizza.
Yeah, and a cheese pizza.
Just for me.
Yeah. It's good. My favorite piece of dialogue that references dialogue in the first film is when Kevin gets away from the sticky bandits in Central Park, and like kids are helpless. You know, like not this kid. Oh yeah, but this time he doesn't have a house full of traps. He's alone. He's alone in the park. He's like, yeah. Kids are scared of the park, which is, you know, from the kids are scared of the dark. You're scared of the dark too, Marv.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. Have you ever noticed, you know, when we're establishing that they're now the sticky bandits and Marv's like pulling like scarves and hats and
I love that, yeah.
People.
I was actually just about to mention that.
Though, before that, there's like a weird like cartoonish sound effect whenever he does it, like whoop,
no.
Like whoop.
Oh no, I didn't notice. No,
on the soundtrack. Yeah, I hadn't noticed it until I rewatched it most recently.
I was going to mention that scene because I love it because it's like this kind of crucial exposition scene where they lay out their plans.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, they could be doing anything, but they're doing this. You know, so they have the sticky bandits thing, and Marv is just like stealing like earmuffs and scarves from ice skaters who are passing by who don't seem to notice.
Yeah,
it's very good.
I mean, you mentioned just towards the end of the last segment on Die Hard 2 that it was a bit of trivia that it was about that it was the first instance of a company filing a lawsuit against the film for not being included. Like, this was very much... This arguably exists only to have sold Talk Boy, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure.
The film exists to sell Talk Boy. Did you ever have a Talk Boy?
No.
I got one.
Really?
Christmas 1992, and sorely disappointed 5-year-old me that it didn't have any of it didn't work to any of the same dexterity as the one in the movie. Like, because he's just like, you know, he gets asked a question.
Couldn't book hotels over the phone, or
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes, yes. You know, it's like, it just doesn't work like that. Like, nah,
what does it do?
Sad to say. Like, well. I'm always like that in films, like, you know, in the conversation, for instance, when like characters are rewinding tapes and they know exactly when to stop it.
Oh,
like,
right, yeah, of course, yeah.
That's,
you know,
that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway, like, minor qualm. I still think this is amazing. I wouldn't probably put it in my top 100 anymore, but it has been.
Would you say that it's better than the first one though?
Oh, as I said, you know, like, whenever I watch it, I'm just like,
setting, yeah.
On what grounds is it not? And I get the grounds that, you know, I agree with you about the bird lady. I agree with you about the family, especially, you know, thinking about the scene in which they're trying to find
Uncle Frank gets so little. He gets his one scene, and he's so good in the first one.
I know. But
look what you did now, you little freak.
No, Catherine O'Hara though, and John Hurd, like when they're filing the report, the missing persons report, and has this ever happened?
That's before? A great scene.
And they're like, well, actually, yeah, it's just it's really, really funny, and I love it. But I don't know, is it better than the?
Although
first
that scene's
one?
not as good. That scene's not as good as the one in the first one where the guy's eating the donuts.
Yeah.
Like the bit of donut falls on the phone, which is a mistake that they kept in.
I don't know. I think it's a high 8 at least out of 10.
Yeah, for me too. Yeah, it's we didn't rate Die Hard 2, by the way.
No, we didn't.
Die Hard 2.
Die Hard 2 would be if the first one's a 10, Die Hard 2 is a high 8, 9, and if Home Alone, the first one, is a 9 or 10, then this has to be kind of a 9 or 10 as well for me.
Right. I give Home Alone a 10 and this an 8.
Oof. Right. Yeah. So okay.
I would love to see the alternative version of this that was less concerned with finding a place for all of the elements from the first film, and instead was focused on Kevin taking a holiday on his dad's credit card in New York on his own, and Tim Curry as this nosy, petulant kind of authority figure trying to, and because you can imagine them coming up with so many different like ways that, because obviously the scene where he first tries to nose into their business, and Kevin
so funny.
has the inflatable clown and and he's playing the recording of Uncle Frank telling him to get out of the bathroom. It's great. And then the next morning he wants to apologize. He's like, if some guy spied on your naked rear end in the shower, would you ever want to see him again? I don't think you'll see my father for the rest of the trip. It's great.
One more thing before we go on to the next segment, because I can't believe we've not mentioned him so far, is John Williams, who I'm hoping you agree is sort of the MVP of arguably both films, certainly of this one though.
Yeah, he's definitely the star of this film.
Yeah, he's amazing.
The opening medley of all of the themes from the film is amazing.
I think it's his best score. I mean, he's made so many memorable scores over the years. I think this is actually his best, because like all the way through the year, I find myself humming Home Alone and Home Alone 2's theme tunes. Like the only other film that I think I could do that with is Robin Hood, the Disney film.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Home Alone music is definitely some of my favorite film music. Really good film, really underrated. Another film that just is underappreciated because of how much people like its predecessor, where you're kind of confusing the concept of worse than with bad.
Yes.
Like when you're coming from a 10 out of 10 down to an 8 out of 10, an 8 out of 10 is still excellent, so.
Yeah, it is. It's very good. Which brings us to a film which doesn't have any predecessor or franchise commercialized prospects. Abel Ferrara's Our Xmas.
Got for me.
Maybe 15, 16 G's.
15, 16 G's. I need some real fucking money. Don't fucking play with me, bitch.
Okay, how much?
A lot, all right? God damn it. It'll be one dead Dominican motherfucker. You understand me?
All right, okay, all right.
You think I'm fucking playing with you? Now you're gonna give me this money, right?
I'm gonna do the best I can, okay?
Do you realize how much fucking money we spent just to get to this point? We've been following you motherfuckers for a long time. What the fuck I'm gonna do with this shit? 15 G's.
Please don't hurt my husband, okay?
Why in the fuck do you care so much about this Dominican piece of shit? He's putting all this shit out in the goddamn street.
'Cause he's my fucking husband, all right?
So the sixth film that we'll be discussing on this episode is Our Xmas. Now I'm proceeding on the basis that that's the right pronunciation of this title. Abel Ferrara's 2001 New York crime drama, although it could be described in many other different ways as well. I'll quote to begin with the actual quotation with which the film begins, which is on-screen text, and it's one line of information to contextualize the setting. It's in December of 1993, the Honourable David Dinkins was completing his first and only term as Mayor of New York. That's the extent to which we get the period setting contextualized for us. But the film is about a man and his wife, both of whom go unnamed, played by Lilo Brancato Jr. and Drea Di Matteo, respectively. She is of Puerto Rican descent, he is Dominican, and the film opens when they're attending their daughter's Yuletide, Christmas time school play on, I think, the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Later that day, the husband attempts at the last minute to acquire a life-size doll that his daughter wants for Christmas, and fails in his attempt to acquire one due to their popularity. And then later that evening, this is, by the way, Christmas Eve, I should mention, and later that evening, him and his wife venture across town to bag and sort the cocaine which they deal. That's the premise of the film.
Right.
Later on in the film, the husband is kidnapped by a group of people whose correspondent to the wife for a ransom is played by Ice-T, who also goes unnamed. He's credited as the kidnapper. That's sort of it, Bobby, right? It's a thin premise,
more or less, yeah.
Stretched across 82 minutes of screen time. I feel as if I got it wrong by saying the film opens on Christmas Eve, does it?
That's actually one of the questions that I have, because I'm not sure when, like obviously...
It's a weird time frame.
It's weird because when they... So like when they first leave their like plush, nice apartment... Yeah. And drive across town, they change cars at a certain place, and then they take they're driving like a luxury car, and then they take like a normal car to this apartment, and you know, at that point, like I didn't read anything about this film before going in, so all I knew was it was an Abel Ferrara film. I knew that it was a crime thriller drama, and that Ice-T was in it, and that was it. So I had no idea what was going to happen, and I was really intrigued by who these people are. And then they're in the apartment, and there are people coming and going, and there are people who appear to be their superiors, who are talking about another character who we don't see, who is maybe one of their contacts. Correct me if you think I'm
I'm with you on this.
Who maybe is not loyal to them anymore. And
they're losing money somehow, whether or not he's dealing less than he should be, or having some himself, or dipping into their own supply, or whatever else.
And the wife,
explained.
The wife, played by Drea De Matteo, is kind of encouraging her husband to confront this guy and stand up to him. Now, I have two questions. One is, do we ever meet that guy?
Pass.
Okay, I'll come back to that. I think maybe we do, but I'm not sure. And the second question is, how long do we spend in that apartment? Is it one day? Or is it not? Because it feels like it could be just the way that it's edited, but it's like we're prompted to feel that this is not one day, that in between one shot and another in this apartment, that they've gone back home and they've come back again, and they've gone back home and they've come back again. And that this is a series of evenings that they've spent in this place, and this is where they spend their evenings. I'm not sure though. It's not made clear.
Yeah, it's not made clear, and it's got a dreaminess to it that's emphasised by the heavy use of dissolves.
Yeah.
And dissolves not between scenes, but between shots within the same scene.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, that suggests the passage of time.
Which gives it a really sort of like late 90s MTV video feel to it.
Right.
And, you know, Ferrara's tapped into those kinds of cultural aesthetics, I guess. So it kind of makes sense on that front. I'm not really sure, to be honest. I don't think I can give a satisfactory or conclusive answer to those kinds of questions. Did you feel that those things were detrimental to your enjoyment? Did they impede your enjoyment of the film?
Not really. Not while I was watching them. I mean, as I said, like when they leave their apartment and they go to this other apartment, I had no idea what was going to happen, and I was intrigued. But then that intrigue kind of turned to confusion pretty quickly.
Yeah, there's a veneer of authenticity here that I think allows it to take a few liberties with me personally. So although I feel the same, I share your confusion, and I still do, evidently. While I'm watching the film, I kind of buy into it. This is just like a milieu into which I'm invited to appreciate and observe and witness a slice of it.
Right.
I'm not in any way going to leave this film with any sort of deeper understanding of the machinations or mechanisms of Manhattan's or Brooklyn's cocaine smuggling or drug dealing scene.
Right.
And I think, you know, I can't speak to its authenticity, but just the very feel of spending time within a milieu like that seems vividly rendered, makes it, to a degree, compelling enough. I mean, if it was any longer, the film, I think it would kind of take a liberty too far, maybe. But as I said, at 82 minutes, I feel like it's it's ostensibly slight, but and yet there's something that makes it kind of work for me as it settles into this sort of character study in its second half, where after, you know, the husband's kidnapped, Andrea Di Matteo, who up to that point has been sort of the driving force of the film anyway, kind of bringing it to life whenever she's on screen, she really comes into her own, I think, as a reluctant matriarch who has to kind of keep this very small family unit together and operate on the principle that if she doesn't, then, you know, her daughter's not going to have access to the good schooling system that they've been able to establish for her through this illicit enterprise. So what do you make of the opening text? That's the sort of...
Well, you said that's the only piece of sort of scene setting that we get, but we also get a closing piece of text that talks about
to be continued.
Mayor Giuliani having been elected and to be continued. But then again, this film was not produced in that time, so the to be continued doesn't mean let's see how well Giuliani deals with this problem. It probably means the opposite of that. It means Giuliani didn't deal with these problems and the problems have continued.
Yeah, Ed Gonzalez, the critic for Slant magazine, he ended his review in 2002 when this was released with fans of Ferrara already know that Giuliani's already written the sequel.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And, you know, this was made on the very cusp of, you know, 9/11 and, you know, the gentrification that happened in displaced communities in New York and, you know, ostensibly improved the streets by taking drugs off them. But the ramifications of that and how it was dealt with and what happens then, you know, where do those communities go? Where do those people go? I like the film's sort of detached ambivalence, if you like, with regard to that.
Yeah, it's an idiosyncratic film, like all of Ferrara's films. You know, I mean, it starts off like Jingle All the Way. You know, the kid, the father trying to find the present, and then
actually the first image we have of New York is a period within a period setting.
That's true. Yeah,
period setting within a period setting, because on video it's like this untouched cobbled street in which horse and carriages roam freely in New York City, and then we pull away and it's revealed to be
the kids play, and then they take the horse and trap to the and then you know, they go home to the apartment and you think it's, you know, you have your impressions of who these people are, and then they go and it becomes this, like, you know, kind of criminal underworld kind of thing, and then once the kidnapping happens, it starts to feel more like a crime family kind of thing, where Andrea Di Matteo, it's almost like a very low-key kind of Godfather sort of thing. And then as more and more is revealed, even though, you know, much is not revealed, it kind of reveals itself to be like a moral parable, you know, where it's like you have these, you see the husband and the wife taking the money that they make from you know, distributing drugs into the community and putting it back into the community in a similar kind of like the opening sequence of The Godfather, where people are asking Don Corleone for favors on the day of his daughter's wedding. You know, this is more like people are coming to them and asking for help with, like, their children's tuition fees and all this kind of stuff, and they're putting money back into the community like this. But
the film sort of acts as a corrective to the received wisdom regarding, like, you know, criminality and sort of ethno crime dynamics, whereby, like, you know, how is that money spent, and it's self-preservation and it's communal, rather than, you know, of course it's sort of taking its cue from dynamics of capitalism and whatever else, but it's putting it to use on a much smaller scale, and it's sort of self-preserving communal ties in the face of systemic kind of hostility against that.
Right, and then the other complicating element is when the husband is kidnapped, the kidnapper played by, or the representative of the kidnappers played by Ice-T is, first of all, I love the fact that there's no precise ransom. He just asks her for money, and she goes away. He gives her 20 minutes. She goes, "It's Christmas Day, isn't it? Or is it Christmas Eve? It's Christmas Eve. It's Christmas Eve, yeah. And she's like, like there's only so much money that I can get on Christmas Eve. And she goes back to the apartment. She comes back with 16 grand, and he's like, "That's not enough." And he's like, "It's all I can get. It's all I can get." He's like, "It's not enough." But he never gives her a figure. He just says a lot more. I want a lot more. And I've never seen that in a film. Someone saying demanding a ransom, but not giving any suggestion as to how much would be satisfactory.
Yeah. Ice-T is hilarious in this film. I think
he's good.
Properly funny.
But he also reveals that he has sort of like a pretense of like moral, superiority and motivation. Like he wants, first of all, he wants the money. So that, like, really this is just like avarice. But he also wants her to promise to keep her husband from selling drugs, and like, he poisons these kids, and and then there's a twist at the end, and the twist is that Ice-T and the kidnappers are actually crooked cops.
Yeah, they're cops.
Which is such a strangely delivered twist. Like, so it's Christmas morning, and the husband and wife are in bed, and the TV is on in the dining room, and the kid comes into the dining room, and on the TV we see the news playing, and we see like the guy talking about like these cops who've been, accused of, corruption and embezzlement and racketeering and things like that. And we see one of the cops being put into the back of a police car, and it's Ice-T, but we don't get a good look at him. Like, his face is in profile inside the car, and he kind of like throws his eye like a little bit toward camera, but it's like you could miss it,
Yeah.
And then we watch the same footage again from the husband and wife's point of view, like a few minutes later in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And she looks at it and goes, I think that's the guy. I wonder, is that the guy? Yeah. It's like, why do we see it twice? Like, what's the point in seeing it twice? Strange. I didn't see the twist coming. I was surprised by it.
Well, as somebody with a deep knowledge of 1993 handovers of mayoral New York, I did see it coming, of course, but no, I didn't. But this is actually the second time I watched this film. I first saw it a few years ago in Wrocław at the New Horizons Festival in Poland, and Ferraro was present, and he spoke for, I think, what it must have been about 60 minutes after the screening with the audience, and he had a lot to say about the changing makeup of his beloved New York City,
right.
And the thematic currents that run through the film and what they represent and what he was trying to do, and it was all very fascinating. Now, but the question is, though, does the film itself,
that's what I was about to say,
do that?
Like, it's all very well to talk about your intentions and what the film means, but it still has to work as something that you sit through, and I think it does to a certain extent. But I think. Like, I asked at the beginning whether we ever meet that character who they're talking about, who might be, sort of betraying them or double crossing them or working behind their back. Is that him in the trunk of the car at the end outside the party with the plastic bag over his head? Because if so, I mean, if we're supposed to know that, like, they don't make it. They don't give the character a name. They don't show us his face.
Have we seen him previously in the film? Like,
right. Well, is he the guy
who sits down opposite Lilo Brancato Jr. on the sofa
and gives him the money? Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking. Is that the guy?
That's what I was. That's what I was thinking that I should surmise. I mean, it's so laid back in its sort of direction, both literally and narratively, that. Again, I can't really commit to any sort of serious answer as to that. And I've seen the film twice now. It is one of those films, though, like, when you read other people's critiques of it, like, I think Jake Cole's capsule review on Letterboxd is excellent. And it's one of those films where I kind of find myself being very easily sort of convinced about. Like, you'll read a review that may or may not be heavily indebted to like press kits or press notes or whatever else, but they seem to know a great deal more about it than I do after just like, a cursory watch, and seem to kind of commit to these ideas as to what it's about. And I'm like, and I read those and I'm like, oh yeah, it completely makes sense now. Yeah, what a great film. I
don't know. I was kind of, as I said, started off quite liking it, then sort of got a little bit confused and found it a little bit overly vague. And then you have these weird scenes, like there's a really long basketball scene where someone drives by and shoots the ball, and it goes on for a long time. You're like, okay, well, I mean, this is an 80-minute film. Why are we spending 5 minutes on this? You know, and it's like it's 40 minutes into the film when we have that scene between the husband and his employee who wants to stow the... Is it money? No, it's drugs, isn't it? Yeah. But... You know, and the character relations beyond the husband and wife are not very well established. You know, like, who are those other people who are in the apartment with them at the beginning? And then I was really surprised that 60 minutes into the film, into this 80-minute film, the kidnapping storyline is completely resolved, and we're left with a 20-minute coda, which is... I really had no idea. I was like, what is going to happen now in the next, like, 20 minutes? Because there's no other characters that they're going to interact with. There's really nothing else, and it's there just to reinforce that subtext. Which is really, I mean, your text has to work before your subtext works for me, and I think it's the weakest Ferrara film that I've seen. It's okay.
Yeah. What would you give it out of 10?
Probably a 5.
Oof. That's a bit harsh, I think. I give it a 7. I think the dynamic between Brancato Jr. and Di Matteo sort of holds it together. It's weird that the whole premise of the film, you know, if you read a synopsis, it's predicated on the kidnap and ransom storyline, which, as you say, doesn't begin until quite a way into the film, and it doesn't last that long either. And so, like, what's either side of that? It's a tricky one. But I do think they share an on-screen chemistry, which you know, this came out. This was being made roundabout after the second season of Sopranos, in which Lito Brancato Jr. as Matthew Bevilacqua, and obviously Drea Di Matteo as Adriana. Actors who did share some screen time in Sopranos, but they didn't share that great a deal. And I do like their chemistry here.
Do you like the style of the film?
Do I like the style of the film? Yes, I do.
Do you like the way it's edited?
I do like the way the whole dissolves thing.
Not so much the dissolves,
like
but
their everyday existence.
Not so much. I quite enjoy that kind of emphasis on process at the beginning of the film more than later, but around the point that it started to confuse me. But no, the dissolves. It's not so much the dissolves, but the way that the narrative information is relayed, and like the introduction of like flashbacks, and it doesn't. I don't know. It's going for abstraction, and it just feels kind of disjointed to me.
It does. Yeah. See, I feel like it succeeds in its attempt to be abstract. And I guess a great deal of our understanding is contingent upon how familiar we are with New York as a general milieu, which, if that is determined overwhelmingly by Home Alone 2, I guess it's far away from that. And also our familiarity with New York specifically towards the end of David Dinkins' reign and Giuliani's own reign as mayor.
What would
you? It's a 7.
What would you? Where would you put it in the Ferrara pantheon?
Let's think. Yeah, I mean, maybe his weakest that I've seen, but similar to what you said regarding Home Alone 2 and Die Hard 2, that's not necessarily like a terrible thing,
right?
Like I much prefer like The Funeral.
Okay.
And I love The Addiction as well.
The Addiction. I haven't seen The Funeral, but my favorite Ferrara film is Ms. 45. I love that.
Which I haven't seen. And I haven't seen his defining New York films either. So I haven't seen King of New York, and I haven't seen Bad Lieutenant, to my shame, which I should really get onto.
Right. Okay, we move on to
absolutely
to Bad Santa.
Santa!
Yeah.
You're bringing my present early?
No.
But I never told you what I wanted.
I said I didn't bring it, dipshit.
Okay, good. I want a stuffed elephant. A pink one.
Well, wish in one hand, shit in the other one. See which one fills up first.
Okay.
So I'm going to be staying here for a while. Things are all fucked up at the North Pole. See, Mrs. Santa caught me fucking her sister, and I'm out on my ass now. She got half of everything. And this is going to be cool. This will do fine. So I'm going to be crashing here. Be just you and me like roommates, you know?
Do you and Mrs. Santa have kids?
No, thank the fuck Christ.
What about the elves?
Well, they stay with Mrs. Santa. I get them on the weekends. Why don't you go run me a bath?
What about the reindeer?
Would you please shut up about reindeer?
What are their names?
Who?
The elves.
Shit, I can't remember. I think one of them's Sneezy and there's a Dopey. And
that's the Seven Dwarves.
Are you shitting me? I was thinking it was, I don't know. Fuck, kid. I just call him, Bub. I say, hey, Bub or Chief or whatever the fuck. I tell him to make the goddamn toys. The fuck is wrong with you?
All right, so film number 7 is Terry Zwigoff's 2003 dark comedy, Bad Santa, starring Billy Bob Thornton and Tony Cox. So this is the story of Willie Soak, played by Billy Bob Thornton, who is a self-loathing alcoholic safecracker who robs department stores every Christmas with the help of his begrudging partner Marcus, who's really the brains of the operation, played by Tony Cox. The pair pose as Santa and his elf and take a job at a department store, and this particular year they run into problems when Willie takes up residence in the house of a kid who's trying to befriend him and whose only guardian is his slightly senile grandmother. Meanwhile, the department store's head of security, played by Bernie Mac, discovers the duo's plan and wants a cut of their take.
Yeah. I like how we always synopsize it and then just check with the other one.
Just in case.
No, that sounds okay to me. Did you mention his boss, played by the late John Ritter?
John Ritter, yeah. John Ritter, his boss, effectively because of Willie's terrible behavior. Actually, that's quite well done, because Willie is heavy drinker. He swears in front of the children. He wets himself. He falls over, and he has sex with various people in the department store, in the changing rooms, and so on. And John Ritter's character Bob Chapesca, he tries to fire them, but because Tony Cox is a little person, they threaten him with a discrimination lawsuit, and he basically he says, "Oh, okay, forget it." But he goes to the security, the head of security, Jin Slagle, played by Bernie Mac, and basically asks him to dig around and find dirt on these two, and that he could use as a pretext for firing them. And that's how Bernie Mac discovers this history of criminal behavior, but he reports back to Bob Chapesca, telling him that they're clean as a whistle.
Yeah.
Because his actual plan is to what would you say, to blackmail them for 50% of their take this year.
Them, Did you watch this when it first came out?
Yeah, I saw it in the cinema, and I was
Did you laugh a lot?
Doubled over laughing at it. I thought it was hilarious.
Really?
And then I saw bits and pieces of it on TV over the years, and it kind of wore off on me. And when I revisited it this time, I really didn't expect to like it at all, but I still think it's pretty funny.
Do you?
Yeah.
Wow, I must say I think I laughed once when, and it's when Willie first arrives at the house that in which he takes up residence with the kid. What's the kid called again? Remind me.
Thurman Merman.
Thurman Merman. When he arrives at the house with Thurman Merman, and incredulously can't believe that Thurman Merman only lives with his grandmother, and just opportunistically just starts to roll a balaclava down his face, just I'm gonna rub it. gonna rob it.
It's so funny.
Which is a great visual gag.
It's very good. I think there are plenty of moments in this that are very, very funny. I think I just there's something about Billy Bob Thornton's performance, and it's not even like the self-destructive behavior. It's just like he's just like living in his own world. Like when they're walking through the car park with Marcus and Willie. And Marcus is like saying, just try to keep a low profile, and he's just like finishing off a beer, and he just like casually throws it away, and it smashes on the windscreen of a car, and sets the alarm off. Loads of little touches like that.
See, like this was the first time I'd watched it in preparation for this episode, and I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting a much more smoothly written, neatly polished, sharp comedy.
Right. Yeah.
Where the line deliveries are, in the way they're delivered, funny. And I feel like, apart from that visual gag, I feel like the laughs here are almost accidental. Like
a lot of it is in the way that the lines are read. I think Tony Cox's trash talk is really quite funny, and it seems like a lot of it was improvised. But like the exchanges between him and Bernie Mac, when Bernie Mac's like telling him to get the drunk Willie out of the car, is like. Bernie Mac accuses him of like playing the disability card or something like that. It's like, it's a matter of physics. I'm 3 feet tall. Draw me a diagram of how I get him to the car. Fucking Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, no, I get that. But like, for me, it was just a little bit too like lackadaisical and laid back in the way it sort of goes about its humour. Like, so this is like early noughties. Like vulgar comedy, like pushing against and anticipating the political correctness that was to come, and
there's a use of the word faggot in the film that would never be allowed in a studio film today. It's directed at the kid. Like it's funny to hear those kinds of things in older films, but. Used so casually, But
I feel like Billy Bob Thornton sort of just somnambulating through it as a sort of like prolonged hangover to like The Man Who Wasn't There, which is obviously a very different film. Although the Coen brothers are executive producers on this.
Yeah, this was their idea. They the two writers. They approached the Coen brothers. They wanted to write something that the Coen brothers would direct, and the Coens gave them this idea. They said they had always had an idea about an alcoholic Santa Claus and his elf, who is a little person who kind of keeps him in line. He's like his caretaker. I'm not sure if it was their idea that they were thieves, or if that was the extent of their idea, but Ficarra and Recco went away and wrote that screenplay and brought it back to the Coens, and the Coens said that it was really funny, but that they didn't want to direct it. And then Terry Zwigoff came in and he did some further rewrites, and there was a whole kind of back and forth, a battle over like the tone of the film. And there are 3 cuts. The tone for me is the thing that I don't like about it.
It's tonally all over the place.
My problem is that it veers into sentiment that is completely unearned. Like it's just like there are just moments where you're just like going, this character just has like this emotional revelation for no reason other than the fact that they're going, wow, we're getting really dark here. We should have a sweet moment. It's better just when it's just being really, really nihilistic, I think.
I was on a jury last month in Italy with Jonathan Rosenbaum, right? And 2 of the films we watched were about junkies, right? Two European films, both of which were about junkies. And Rosenbaum turned to me like during both and just went, "Man, junkies are so boring." And I kind of feel the same way about drunks as well, like on-screen drunks. I don't find them like dramatically compelling, and the sort of self-destructive lousiness of Willie's character I don't find dramatically interesting either, and I certainly don't find it compelling source of comedy.
Okay, I definitely agree that it's not dramatically compelling on any level, but I do think it's funny, and I do think a lot of the offhand interactions with Thurman, between Thurman and Willie, are quite funny, and Thurman's kind of obliviousness to like it's revealed at the end that we're not really sure what's going on in his head, because like it's revealed at the end that he knows that there's no Santa Claus, and he knows that this guy is not Santa Claus, and he's basically just looking for a father figure. But I think he's quite funny. I mean, I don't think it's a great film or anything like that, but I was surprised that I definitely laughed quite a few times throughout this film. I think Bernie Mac is funny. I think John Ritter is funny.
You can see the scenes between Bernie Mac and John Ritter being the most sort of consciously nerve-proddy. Like, so what I mean when I say, like, it's anticipating and very much positioning itself within and against, like, politically correct culture that was coming to the fore in early noughties. Like their scenes, because John Ritter plays the employer who's aware of, like, saying politically incorrect things, but doesn't know the correct phrases.
He's also a little bit of a prude, though, as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
like,
so,
what does Bernie Mac say to him? Something like, man is a sexual animal or something. Like, he can't do anything about that, and he kind of doesn't say anything in response, and Bernie Mac is like, right? And he's like, oh yeah, of course not. He's like, nor wouldn't want to either.
Yeah.
Hope not. It'd be the end of the fucking human race.
Yeah. And it's got this really sort of, I don't know, like, so I mentioned the tonal thing, which I think is informed heavily by like this constant effort to distance us as well from what's happening. So like stylistically, I mean, so we've got like fade outs, we've got irises, all those different techniques that like make us aware that we're watching something like so like artificial and crafted, that I like, you know, to a similar degree, like as Manor wasn't there, but you know, the Coens are much better directors than Terry Zwigoff. And there's just an unpleasantness to this which I didn't like, and yet I don't like to make those kinds of critiques against films, because you subsequently you come off, or you risk coming off as a prude yourself.
When you say there's an unpleasantness to it, what do you mean?
There's an unpleasantness to its sort of vision, if I may use the term, that I don't connect with at all. I don't feel that they're driving towards any kind of like they're not fully committed to it. And yet there's no redeeming qualities to be found within it. So the dormant conscience that kicks in for Willie, like this...
I prefer that wasn't there at all.
You know, this dormant, this belated assumption of the father figure mantle. Like, either do it or don't, but like it just seems so half-baked.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
And it comes across as unpleasant. And I will say this, like, I was like, oof, ouch, at Bernie Mac's death in it. Which, like, I wasn't.
Yeah.
I really didn't.
Which is kind of inconsequential. Doesn't have any real like.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't pose any real problem for Tony to do that.
Yeah.
Or for Marcus rather to do that.
Which again reinforces its like unpleasantness for me. Like.
Yeah. No, but I mean, it's not like so Bernie Mac's character blackmails them, and then he is just very easily dispatched by Marcus. There's no real. Marcus doesn't have to like do anything really challenging to it's just too easy, you know, and it's easy to the point of kind of not posing any problem for them. Like this guy kind of gets in their way, and then he's just easily dispatched. So what was the point of that? Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that is part of the back and forth between Zwigoff on the one hand and the Weinsteins on the other hand, and the Coen brothers on the other third hand. None of them saw eye to eye. There are 3 cuts of the film. Which one did you watch? Do you know?
It's 93 minutes. I don't know if that helps.
93 minutes.
Yeah. No, sorry, it was 88. Sorry, 88.
Oh, that was Zwigoff's director's cut.
Right.
Okay, because there are 3 cuts. That's the one I haven't seen.
Right.
So I would have seen the theatrical cut in 2003, and I'm pretty sure the one that I have on DVD is the unrated cut, which is longer. So Zwigoff's cut is like 88 minutes. The theatrical cut is like 91 minutes, and the director's cut, or the unrated cut rather, is like 98 minutes. So the director's cut is did I say that right?
Yeah.
So the director's cut is 88 minutes, the theatrical cut is about 91, and the unrated cut is about 87, 88. So Zwigoff's cut is 10 minutes shorter than the longest cut, which is the most widely seen cut, which is the one where they put all of the additional kind of profanity and stuff back into it. I'd be curious to know whether, because I know Zwigoff said that he made the script warmer,
right?
So I think a lot of the moments of sentiment might have come more from him than from the original screenwriters.
And yet the whole framework is so anti-cathartic, to the point at which, like, when Willie ends up, when he realizes that Thurman, sorry, when he realizes that Thurman has a black eye as a result of being beaten up by those bullies, that it's similar to Christmas Story, actually, similar to Farkas, although he doesn't fight back. We get one of those would-be comical shortcuts to him just, like, really beating up those young lads, or at least one of them, the head bully. And for me, it didn't, like, I usually laugh at that kind of thing, right? Like, I love to see on-screen, like, comeuppances dished out. And I didn't find it funny. I just found it kind of, like, sad.
The joke is in the next scene. The joke is in the next scene where he's telling Marcus this story, and it's just like he completely miscommunicates it. Like, to him, what he means to say is that he is now living with this kid who was being bullied, and he went and he, exacted retribution against the bullies. But what he says was, I think what he says is, I think I've turned a corner. And Marcus's response is, oh yeah, you fucking petites now? He's like, no, I'm not talking about that. I beat the shit out of some kids today, but it was for a purpose. It made me feel good. It made me feel good about myself. And that's all he says. And Marcus is like, you need many, many years of therapy.
Yeah.
I think that line's really funny.
I think I might have found it funnier if it had offset that line by showing us the beating afterwards.
Right.
Because I think it's more of a visual gag if you follow the line up with the image rather than the other way around.
No, I think it works. I think it works better that way because we understand what he means and Marcus doesn't. Whereas if it was the other way around, we'd be in Marcus's position. We wouldn't understand what he means first. Because the joke I think is in Marcus's misunderstanding
maybe
the worst joke in the film is I don't know the name of the actor. Let me just see. Is it Ajay Naidu? The guy who's like eyeballing him across the bar, and then he comes outside and says, "I'm not gay," and then attempts to like sexually assault him, and he's rescued by Thurman. It's really weird, not funny at all, completely arbitrary, and
it confuses us because it hints at some sort of past storyline, like we're led to like confusion as to like, well, does he know him? Like, it's weird, like really weird. I feel like it's the whole milieu, which everyone's trying to attempt to depict. Just it isn't pulled off with any sort of sincerity or warmth or attachment, and I just found, it's the worst film I've watched as part of our Habitus assignments.
Worse than Playground?
I forgot about Playground. Okay, it's the second worst film that we've watched.
What did you think of the scene where they're haggling over the Bernie Mac's cut of the? You don't think that was funny? No.
Nah, like so.
Where Marcus just doesn't have any hand to play. He's just like hoping that Bernie Mac will settle for like a lower thing. He starts out with 30%, half. I meant 33%. I meant half and a third. Half. 35%.
The final one, he doesn't even verbalize it. He just smells it.
Yeah.
Like the rental desk clerk in Die Hard 2.
I'm just like I like some of the kid bothering Willie with like Christmas questions as well. I just think are really funny. What are their names? Who? The elves? Shit, I can't remember. I think one of them is Sneezy and there's a Dopey. That's the Seven Dwarfs. You're shitting me. I was thinking there was, I don't know. I just called them Bub. I said to say, hey Bub or Chief or whatever the fuck. I just told them to make the goddamn toys. I think some of the dialogue is really funny. Some of their interactions.
Yeah, its application and delivery and sharpness is so contingent on like, I feel like it's contingent on like whether they just got it right. There's just like no attention paid to like making a movie. It's just like they try to make some scenes work, some scenes don't, and it's just like thrown together.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, like the hook is drunk Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah,
that's it.
And I didn't realize that was the hook.
Yeah,
and I think if I'd gone in more prepared for that kind of film, maybe I would have connected with it more. But it just felt like a very sort of unchallenging film to make.
Sure. Jack Nicholson and Bill Murray were interested in playing the parts, but they had commitments to Lost in Translation and Something's Gotta Give, was it? his 2003 film, whatever it was.
Schmidt? No, that was 2002.
No, that was 2002. Yeah.
What would you give it out of 10?
I'd have to give it a 6.
I'm going to go for half than that.
3, really?
3. Yeah, 3.
That's harsh. I'd have to. I mean, I enjoyed it. You know, it definitely is. I think it's a funny film. It's not an impressive film, but you know, it's the most important thing is that it's funny, and I think it was funny. Will we move on to our final film?
Final film. Happy Christmas.
I thought we'd be done. Is that stupid?
With the book?
Yeah, with the book.
Oh, stupid. 10 days.
I don't know. I mean, like, yesterday I realized, like, it probably wasn't going to happen.
Yesterday? Yeah. Yesterday you were like, you know what, I think we have a good 200 pages left. I don't think we're going to get it done. 12 hours.
I didn't know.
Jenny, you're so cute. You're so excited. I love it.
I thought we were going to, like, cram. I don't know.
Your, like, crazy excitement where you think we're going to finish a book in 10 days has been something that's really, it's given me a lot of, like, vitality that I didn't have before. I wasn't feeling excited about in writing. I feel excited about this because it's fun. I feel excited about my other book. Thank you.
You make me feel stuff, too.
I'll take it.
But I can't. I'm gonna just, like, I mean it, but I'm gonna be looking at my phone instead of you while I'm saying it and using this voice, like a robot voice, but I mean it. I think you know that I mean it, but I can't. I feel lots of things.
This is as emotional as I've ever seen you. There's a little shiny. What's happening?
No, it's not. I'm fine.
Jeannie.
God, don't.
I really like you.
I like you too.
I really liked hanging out with you.
Yeah, I liked hanging out with you, whatever.
So the 8th and final film we're going to discuss on this episode is Happy Christmas. Joe Swanberg's 2014. I described it as a mumblecore film at the onset of the show. Just to briefly run over its synopsis, Anna Kendrick plays 27-year-old Jen, who returns to Chicago to stay with her big brother Jeff and his wife Kelly. Jeff played by Joe Swanberg, Kelly by Melanie Linsky. In Chicago, on the run up to Christmas following a breakup. Jen's arrival initially unsettles Jeff's wife, who's a housewife and an aspiring writer, before the two bond over pizza, beer, and plans to co-pen an erotic novel. Now, Jeff and Kelly are contentedly married and have a 2-year-old son, Jude, played by Swanberg's actual son. And Jen agrees to babysit Jude, I suppose, in return for a bed in the couple's basement. Over the course of the film, although she acts as if everything is fine and dandy, her fragility, irresponsibility, and perhaps even aimlessness begin to impact upon the domestic harmony in the house. This is a film I very, very much like. I don't know Joe Swanberg's early work. I really like his film Drinking Buddies, which is in similar vein to this, very improvisational tone, very focused on ordinary chemistries and interrelations, and the ever-changing shifts in domestic dynamics. And I think it's rendered extremely well in this film. I think Anna Kendrick's performance is one of the best on-screen performances of 2014. I love Swanberg's warm presence in it, kind of playing what I would presume is a fictionalized version of himself. And I think Melanie Linsky is also great as Kelly. You hadn't seen it before I asked you to watch it for this episode, had you?
No. And I have to say, I'm looking at IMDb here, and the still from the trailer is the scene near the beginning where Joe Swanberg and his friend, or his friend or client or coworker, are in their office together.
Yeah.
And they're, making some kind of business arrangements. And I remember I was watching that scene and I just thought, oh no, what am I about to watch here? it's just like so. Even just like the it's the bare wall. It's like the way it's framed. It's the dialogue. I was like, it felt like an amateur film, but it definitely picks up after that. And basically, I went in with a certain degree of prejudice about mumblecore and this kind of film, and I also knew that the film was improvised out of almost nothing, like, you know, like an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where they have a broad like plot outline, like this is broadly, these are the points that we need to hit, but what happens and what the characters say to each other and the kind of the emotional content of any given scene is completely improvised. That's how they made this film, and I have a certain degree of, you know, prejudice toward that technique, unless you're Larry David, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's played for, let's say, more dramatically weighty or dramatically nuanced purposes than Curb Your Enthusiasm, I suppose, which is a lot broader in its comedy. And the scenes tend to cut and end before we reach any sort of emotional resolution or epiphany, which I suppose could be kind of enervating if you're against that kind of thing. It's funny how you mentioned the framing, because a lot of the scenes actually proceed from the vantage point of like an early 1900s proscenium march. So like the way, like, for instance, the kitchen is set up in the home, the living room and where the Christmas tree is, like a lot of the scenes seem to be set up so that for the sole purpose of being able to film from one camera setup. So like, for instance, you'll get Jeff and Kelly framed around the kitchen table in such a way that they're able to talk to one another, but actually still both face the camera. Which I guess is just like a practical thing. I don't feel that it's particularly elaborate in its cinematic grammar, but you know, the film's not going for that. I love its kind of warm, non-judgmental depiction of certain types of behavior and the dialectic between other people, and like, and also like the tipsiness that informs like character changes and changes of thought and thought patterns. So what you weren't taken by Anna Kendrick's performance in her depiction?
No, she was good. I like all the performances. Right. I just think it comes across as like this film is about something, but it's about something relatively weighty, and because it's improvised out of nothing, it doesn't really ever dig deep into what it's supposedly about. You know, it has the scene at the beginning where she passes out drunk at the party.
Yeah.
And then it has the scene at the end where she burns the pizza and falls asleep.
Yeah.
But in between, it's kind of about other things, you know, which is to be expected when the film has no script. You know, I think with something like Curb Your Enthusiasm, the comedy is so situational, and the situations are pre-scripted. The actual comedic dialogue exchanges are not really necessarily rooted in the kind of structural situation comedy, and therefore they can be improvised on top of that. But with this, you know, like, it is drama, and it needs structure.
Do you feel like they filmed enough to reach 82 minutes of running time and then just thought, yeah, we've got enough for a feature-length film now?
It does kind of feel that way to me, yeah.
Yeah. It does end abruptly as well, so like it ends at the point at which, like, I suppose Kendrick's character like properly gets interesting, because she's confronted about her behaviour, and the behaviour itself isn't like, I mean, it's, of course, it's self-destructive, but like, you know, it's nothing, I don't think, to like, you know, if you were a pal, to be like properly worried about. It's just, you know, it's a process she needs to get through. But like the fact that her behavior is beginning to like affect the actual household, and the fact that there's a kid there, and I totally get like Kelly's reluctance to sort of accept her presence in the house. and then it's confronted at the end after, as you mentioned, that she sets off the fire alarm due to just clumsiness. And I kind of know some people like that in real life, and it really kind of grates on us, like their lack of self accountability. And it's very facile, I suppose, to blame the behaviour on drink rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
She drinks because of that, which is, I think, why I maybe prefer Drinking Buddies as a whole. Although Kendrick's performance tops everything in that film. But so she's confronted, and it's Christmas morning, and she's she wakes up with a properly horrible hangover, as a result of kind of prematurely ditching this dude who she gets with.
The guy who sells her drugs, and then
sells her weed.
That relationship of all the relationships in the film was the least interesting.
But did you not think it had a certain realism to it, like a proper verisimilitude?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think realism in itself is not really of value, is it?
No, I mean, no, it's not. Although I do appreciate it when it's attempted and achieved as its own end and virtue. And the scene in which they're making out, it's rooted in the awkward everyday, right? Swanberg's whole aesthetic. And drawing attention to the minutiae of awkwardness and the way in which we negotiate that awkwardness. And I love the scene in which they're making out, Webber and Kendrick, and Kendrick's giving them all these different directives in terms of what's comfortable and what's good, and he keeps mucking it up, and it's like it's like a more pleasant version of that New Yorker short story Cat Person that got published recently. And then the scene that sort of catalyzes the final act of self-destruction in the film is when she invites him back to hers or to her brother's, and she says to him, I want to fuck you, and it's Christmas Eve, and he's quite reasonably saying, well, no, I've got to go back to my parents, it's Christmas Eve, I've got to see my mother, etc., etc. And she's just thinking wrongly that she's the center of this guy's universe, just completely switches, changes the tune, and goes wow, you're such an idiot. And it's again, I think every other scene in the film, or every other dramatically momentous moment in the film, it's filmed in one take. And I actually don't know how Kendrick, I marvel whenever I watch the scene, because I don't know how Kendrick acts or enacts that emotional change. It's just a really great scene.
I like all the performances, and I agree that the film has a kind of a humanist warmth to it, but I also think that it feels a little bit insubstantial in its in that warmth at times. It almost feels twee at times, kind of insubstantially, kind of touchy feely, everybody everybody loves everybody, and everybody does the best. There's no conflict between Melanie Linsky's character and Joe Swanberg's character. The three-way conversation between Anna Kendrick, Melanie Linsky, and Lena Dunham's character. Lena Dunham plays Anna Kendrick's friend, and they're the ones who kind of sort of first kind of push Kelly to maybe kind of think a little bit more critically about her domestic situation and how she had these dreams of being a writer, and now because Joe Swanberg makes more money than she does, she's been kind of left at home with the baby, and how he could make more time for her to write and all that kind of stuff. And you think, okay, well, this is going to be a source of drama, but it's not. Instead it's a source of a kind of fairly mildly comedic but not particularly interesting
He's
subplot.
Incredibly understanding, right?
Yeah, everybody's incredibly understanding, everybody's incredibly loving, and it's not like...
But sometimes in life people are.
Yeah, but I mean, you keep appealing to this, that this is reality, but...
No, but I'm saying, it's a legitimate... I mean, in a landscape, in a cinematic landscape that accommodates a broad range of aesthetic approaches and sensibilities and styles. I think it's perfectly legitimate for Swanberg to identify a niche and then to kind of want to work within that, where the dramas and the stakes are so kind of subtle and hinge upon such small things on an everyday level. He's not providing some sort of panoramic framework to account for this social behaviour or otherwise. It's not like a Ken Loach form of realism. It's just a very sort of lo-fi, as you said, kind of amateurish in a way, kind of persistently so. Like, it's weird.
But his understanding of her complaint and how easily resolved it is, if that led to something that was in itself interesting, I wouldn't have a problem with it. But instead it leads to, as I said, this kind of like, at best, kind of mildly comedic series of scenes where they're writing an erotic novel. Lena Dunham and Anna Kendrick are helping Melanie Liskey,
which I find the weakest scenes in the film.
Yeah,
actually,
me too.
The most annoying.
Well, actually, I actually prefer them to the scenes with the boyfriend, but that's what I'm saying. Like, it's neither one thing nor the other. Like, it doesn't provide any kind of like substantial dramatic development, and it also doesn't provide anything in lieu of that. So just like the conversation that they have at the bottom, in the basement, about like, it's about feminism, and she says, like, I'm not a feminist. I've read Andrea Dworkin and that kind of stuff, but it doesn't. You think, okay, well, this is going to lead to something, and what it leads to is not very good. Ultimately, what it leads to is not conflict with her husband, because that's instantly resolved. What it leads to is this,
what it leads to
ostensibly comedic scenario that isn't really funny or interesting.
Yeah. What it leads to, I think, is a temporary equilibrium and acceptance of Anna Kendrick's presence in the house, which then makes that final confrontation, which again is rooted in just the banal everyday, kind of all the more sort of gut-wrenchingly awkward and awful. But, everything works out okay, because, as you said, everyone's understanding. And
I'm feeling, given the impression that I dislike the film, I actually would be more sort of positive than negative on it. I think it's nice, but kind of vapid. I think there's something there in the Anna Kendrick character, I agree, but it's not developed. It's established, then it's set aside for like an hour, and then it's reintroduced. Yeah.
Consequently,
this is
I'm probably coming across as like a 10 out of 10 supporter of the film.
Have you said you've seen Drinking Buddies? Have you seen any other, like, how familiar are you with mumblecore?
I'm not familiar at all, to be honest. And I understand that it's developed kind of a lot since the term was coined. Mm-hmm. Like, I saw like computer chess, but like,
yeah.
I mean, is that mumblecore? I don't know.
Right. I mean, but like my exposure to mumblecore would be in the subcategory of mumblegore. The mumblecore filmmakers like Ty West and Adam Wingard, who, and like Patrick Bryce, who directed Creep. Adam Wingard made like A Horrible Way to Die and You're Next, and Ty West made The House of the Devil and The Innkeepers. And when I watch this, I can see that element particularly in those two Ty West films, and I love those films. But for those horror filmmakers, it seems like a kind of a way to make a horror film for very, very little money, because what you end up doing is you spend the first, and a lot of people hate these films for this reason, but you spend the first hour of the film with not very much happening. People just kind of like sitting around. Like The Innkeepers is all about like these two clerks in a hotel that's about to shut down, and there are like two guests in the whole hotel, and the first like hour there's a story about the hotel being haunted, but like that doesn't hugely play into the film until the end.
Right.
Great film. But yeah, I mean, I also see on those lists of mumblecore films people who like, so say Adam Wingard made A Horrible Way to Die and You're Next, but then his next film was like The Guest, and then it was like Blair Witch, and like they're listed as well as like these are examples of mumblegore. But his next film is Godzilla versus King Kong. It's not going to make it onto the list as well.
Yeah. So what would you give this one, Bobby?
As my first mumblecore film, I was pleasantly surprised. I'd give it a 6.
Okay. Yeah. It remains an 8 for me.
Okay.
I was surprised by how much I liked it when I saw it a few years ago. In fact, I saw it in Wrocław the same year that I saw Xmas, and surprised back then, and pleasantly surprised and pleased to appreciate it just as much on this time. So an 8 for me.
All right, enough of this gooey show of emotion. Let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening to this special bumper Christmas episode of the Habitus. My name is Bobby Lowe, and I'm here with
Michael Pattison.
And please subscribe to us on Stitcher and tune in, or on SoundCloud, indeed. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.